Chapter 1102. When Meg heard what Gloria had done for the children and saw the sincere smile on her face, he couldn't help but smile as well. What a nice girl. It was great to be able to take off her cloak and live a new life. Camilla was watching from a distance, muttering to herself as she pinched a leaf. If Meg did anything bad, she would step in and save the damsel in distress. However, this guy was too good at hiding in front of others. Who would have thought that this man with a warm smile on his face would skillfully tie the embarrassing knot in the little dark room? Then, he would use the leather whip to hit the softest and most sensitive parts of the body. Then, he would hold the red candle and smile strangely. Moreover, the scariest thing was that this guy had recorded everything with a photostone. This was a beast in human form. Camilla roared in her heart. She wanted nothing more than to kill Meg with a karate chop and rescue Gloria from this devil's abyss. I will transfer the money to teacher Luna. I will also tell her about the winter clothes. She knows the children very well and is very attentive. She is indeed the best person to distribute these things. Meg said with a smile. Thank you. Gloria said gratefully. She was afraid that she would be too late. Winter was already over, and the children still wouldn't be able to wear new cotton clothes. Oh right, how are the new winter clothes selling? Meg asked curiously. He had given Gloria a few down jacket designs before, but he didn't know how they were progressing. Seeing that she was still wearing a trench coat today, he guessed that she hadn't finished them yet. The sample clothes are already done. They are very beautiful and super warm. However, because we need to fill the clothes with fluff, we need to purchase a lot of feathers and do some fine processing. The first batch of 10 down jackets is already being rushed. The production should be able to increase in the future. Gloria looked at Meg with admiration and praised, Mr. Meg is really amazing. Every piece of clothing you design is so beautiful. Miss Gloria, you flatter me. It's just a hobby. Meg waved his hand with a profound look on his face. The blueprint library that he had swindled from the system was enough for him to use for a few years. It was no problem for him to show off. Shameless. The system's indignant voice rang in Meg's mind. Gloria's eyes were filled with stars as she thought to herself, even a top-notch tailor would be amazed by his hobby. Perhaps Mr. Meg is a genius designer who was held back by cooking. Meg and Gloria chatted for a while. Meg asked some questions about the Aden Chamber of Commerce and Jeffrey. After going through so much, he was still full of fighting spirit to overthrow the Aden Chamber of Commerce's rule over the Aden Square. He also believed that it wouldn't be long before he could bring down Jeffrey and make the Aden Chamber of Commerce officially abolish the discrimination against half-breeds. This was what he wanted to do as a father and as a boss. Gloria was not scheming at all. She answered whatever Meg asked. Unfortunately, she didn't know much about these things, so she didn't give Meg any useful information. In half a month, the Aden Chamber of Commerce's year-end celebration will be held. Mr. Meg, little Amy, and the ladies of the restaurant, would you like to attend? Gloria asked with a smile. Year-end celebration? But I'm not a member of the Aden Chamber of Commerce. Meg shook his head. Last time, he was invited by Miss Hill. This time, he didn't receive an invitation. I'm now a member of the Aden Chamber of Commerce's Board of Directors. If you're willing to attend, you can enter with this gold card of mine. Gloria took out a gold card and handed it to Meg. This. Meg looked at the gold card and hesitated for a moment. He took it and nodded with a smile. Okay, thank you very much, Miss Gloria. You're welcome. An inexplicable blush appeared on Gloria's face as she bade farewell. If it's the year-end celebration, then the first president selection should be starting soon, right? I wonder if Miss Hill is ready to challenge Jeffrey. Meg played with the gold card in his hand thoughtfully. Playing with the card that still has Miss Gloria's body scent and warmth, he thinks is touching her body. Damn pervert. Camilla came to the table at some point and sat down where Gloria was sitting with a look of disgust. Sitting on the chair that still has Miss Gloria's body scent and warmth, and rubbing the rough chair, you think you're already wriggling on her body, Miss Masochist? Mag kept the card, and leaned back comfortably in his chair with a smile as he replied with a question. Camilla's body stiffened again. How could such a deep thought that she had been hiding be exposed so easily? I'll repeat it again. I'm a masochist. Not a masochist, Camilla said in a deep voice. Meg stopped before going too far and changed the topic. I wonder if Miss Masochist has already considered joining the restaurant. You only need a year to get back all the photo stones. I will also keep my mouth shut about this matter and won't say a word to a third person. A year. Camilla's voice suddenly raised a few octaves. Yes, but you don't have to worry. I'll still pay you. Your benefits will be the same as the other waiters. Meg nodded and took out the photo stone to play with. How do I know if you're lying to me? You didn't have a photo stone with you that day. Camilla stared at the photo stone in Meg's hand. Then you can see for yourself. Meg casually tossed the photo stone over. Camilla caught the photo stone and glanced at Meg. She then gathered her mental strength into the photo stone doubtfully. Ah, harder, harder. Slap, slap, slap. The shameful images and sounds made Camilla's pale face turn red. Bastard. Shameless. Pervert. Masochist. Camilla angrily threw the photo stone back to Meg. You're the one who prepared everything. This can only be considered as self-defense. Mag shrugged innocently. Camilla opened her mouth but couldn't refute. She suddenly remembered that this photo stone looked familiar. It seemed like she had specially brought it that day to record the images so that she could give it to Miss Gloria as proof that Meg was a pervert. All right, take off your clothes. I'm going to start the official interview. Meg stood up and looked at Camilla. Chapter 1103. Take off my clothes. Camilla's eyes widened as she stared at Meg in disbelief. This guy actually wants me to take off my clothes in broad daylight. Isn't this request a little too exciting? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm talking about your cloak. I need to test if you can do the job, so I need to go into the kitchen. It's not very convenient for you to wear this cloak. Meg gestured at Camilla's cloak. Camilla snorted coldly. She flicked her finger, and the cloak on her shoulder slid down and hung on the chair. There was an inexplicable sense of disappointment in her heart. Please come in with me. Meg walked toward the dining room and held the door for Camilla to enter before letting go. In the kitchen, Phyllis was seriously practicing her fried rice. Meg walked to the kitchen door and watched Phyllis skillfully lift the fried rice in the iron wok. It turned into a beautiful rainbow before falling back into the iron wok again. He nodded with satisfaction. This girl's talent was really too good. If it wasn't for the fact that Irina really needed such a talent, he definitely wouldn't have let her go. I didn't expect an elf to be able to cook so well. Camilla also came to the kitchen door and couldn't help but exclaim. Phyllis turned off the fire and put the fried rice on a plate before looking at the kitchen door. Boss. Phyllis nodded slightly at Meg, and then her gaze lingered on Camilla's soft breasts for a moment. She suddenly felt defeated. Why are all the women around Mr. Meg so big? As expected, he still likes women with big breasts. Phyllis, very good. Meg walked into the kitchen and smiled. Can I try it? Of course. Phyllis hurriedly nodded and handed a clean spoon to Meg. Her eyes were full of anticipation. Mr. Meg said that as long as she learned how to cook Yeongju fried rice and braised chicken and rice, she could go to Her Highness' side and help her. Meg scooped up a spoonful of fried rice and put it into his mouth. It was just ordinary rice with ordinary ingredients, but in his mouth, it exploded into an inconceivably wonderful taste. Chewing carefully, he felt the wonderful taste of the various ingredients colliding in his mouth, and a satisfied expression appeared on his face. Phyllis didn't use the ingredients provided by the system, and Meg had also made some changes to the original recipe, replacing the ingredients with ingredients that could be easily obtained in the wind forest. The situation in the wind forest had already reached the level of war. It was already difficult for the frontline soldiers to fill their stomachs. Naturally, there was no requirement for ingredients. But even with the change of ingredients, the fried rice made by Phyllis was still as delicious as ever. Very good. Meg opened his eyes and gave Phyllis a thumbs up. You don't have to practice cooking fried rice anymore. I'll teach you how to make braised chicken and rice later. Really? Phyllis's face lit up, but she still found it hard to believe Meg. Of course. Meg nodded, and then turned to Camilla, who was standing at the kitchen door, and introduced, "This is Countess Bartoli. You're about to leave, so I'm planning to hire another worker in charge of preparing ingredients. She just volunteered, but I still need to test her ability first." "Hello." Phyllis nodded slightly at Camilla, but a strange look flashed in her eyes. She had heard the princess mention Countess Bartoli before. She should be a vampire, and she seemed to have been molested by the princess in the past. Camilla withdrew her murderous gaze from Meg, and looked at Phyllis, and said calmly, "Hello." She didn't have a good impression of the elves. Irina had embarrassed the vampires many times before, and she had also repeatedly. Those unbearable memories made her dislike the elves, but she still maintained a certain level of vigilance. "Countess Bartoli, please come in," Meg said to Camilla, and pulled out a thick, long, and round cucumber from the side. What are you doing?" Camilla looked at the yellow light in Meg's hand, and her throat moved unconsciously as she asked cautiously, "I need to test your knife skills and talent." Meg put the cucumber on the chopping board, took the Chinese kitchen knife, and cut it in half from the middle. In the blink of an eye, half of the cucumber had already been cut into long, thin strips the size of toothpicks, and arranged neatly on the chopping board. "Your turn." Meg turned his wrist, and handed the kitchen knife in his hand to Camilla. "What's so difficult about this?" Camilla smiled contemptuously, and took the kitchen knife to cut the cucumber in front of her. "Aya, blood." Meg looked at the intact cucumber, and then at Camilla, who was pinching her fair and slender fingers, and his eyelids twitched wildly. He felt like he had found the wrong person. This countess didn't look like someone who could cut cucumbers well at all. "This stupid cucumber hurt me." Camilla stared at the cucumber on the chopping board with some annoyance. "It's just a small cut. If you didn't pay attention, it would have healed by itself." Meg couldn't help but roll his eyes, and sighed. "Forget it, it seems like you're not qualified to work in the kitchen. I take back what I said before. You can't be a new employee of the restaurant. This guy, he's looking for an excuse to announce the photo stone. No, this can't happen." Camilla looked at Meg with a trace of anxiety in her eyes, but her expression was still cold and arrogant. She sneered. "It's just a cucumber, I can cut it into strands of hair for you." She raised her right hand, and 5 sharp nails extended from her fingertips, like 5 sharp knives. She scratched the cucumber a few times, and when she retracted her hand, the cucumber on the chopping board had already turned into a pile of hair-like strands. Meg reached out and pinched a hair-like cucumber strand. Even he couldn't help but admire her knife skills. "This is the 9-yin skeletal claw, right?" Meg put down the cucumber strand. There was nothing to say about her knife skills, but when he thought about how it was scratched with claws, he felt a strange feeling in his heart. Anyway, he couldn't accept a dish made this way. "Hair, I cut it even finer than you. Are you satisfied now?" Camilla said proudly as she took out a manicure knife to clean her nails. Meg shook his head and said, "Using claws doesn't meet the hygiene standards of the restaurant. If you can turn your claws into knives of similar size, and at the same time maintain the same level of knife skills, then you'll be hired." Such a simple thing, of course I can do it easily." Camilla picked up 5 small knives, and then cut a cucumber into round segments of different sizes. Chapter 1104. Meg caught a piece of cucumber that rolled off the chopping board and threw it into his mouth. As he chewed on the crisp and refreshing cucumber, he looked at the slightly embarrassed Camilla with a smile, and said, "Congratulations, you've been hired. If there are no special circumstances, you can come over tomorrow morning to familiarize yourself with the work. Phyllis will tell you what work you need to do." Camilla, who was thinking about how to resolve the awkwardness, was stunned for a moment. She looked at Meg and said, "Didn't you say I can't use my claws? I've already thought of a solution." "I'll tell you when you come tomorrow," Meg replied calmly. "Come out, I have something to say to you alone." Camilla turned and walked out of the kitchen. "Wait a moment," Meg said to Phyllis, and followed Camilla to a position near the door. "Although I was coerced by your despicable methods and agreed to do some things for you, the fact that I'm a waitress in a restaurant can't be known by others. Otherwise, my reputation will be greatly damaged," Camilla said with a serious expression. Meg nodded slightly, and said, "The preparation of ingredients can be completed before the restaurant starts operating. If you don't want others to know about this, then you can leave after you're done with your work. The customers won't know that you're an employee of the restaurant. It's a deal. It's only for a year. If you still want to play any tricks by then, I won't let you go." Camilla clenched her fists. "Don't worry, I'm a person of my word. As long as you work hard and be obedient in this year, I'll give you all the photo stones." Meg nodded. Camilla snorted coldly and turned to leave. "Wait, I'll give you your chef's uniform." Meg turned to the counter and took out a set of female chef's uniform and handed it directly to Camilla. "You're making me wear this." Camilla looked at the chef's uniform in Meg's hands, and there was a hint of anger in her eyes. "This is a work uniform. The chef has to ensure that the food is clean and hygienic for the customers. The dress you're wearing and your flying hair clearly don't meet the standards." Meg looked at her wavy hair. If a strand of hair fell into the ingredients, it would be troublesome. It would be a disaster. Camilla hesitated for a moment before taking the chef's uniform. "By the way, since you're going to work in the restaurant and become a member, it's not convenient to call you Countess." "I'll call you Camilla." Meg paused for a second before revealing a smile. "You can call me boss." This guy actually dared to call me by my name. Camilla's eyes were burning with rage as she gritted her teeth and said, "Meg, well, you can call me whatever you like." Meg shrugged indifferently. He didn't care about this anyway. Camilla took the clothes and angrily pushed the door open. She did not want to stay in this place for a second longer. "Madam, are you all right? You don't look too good. What are you holding in your hand?" The black cat servant came forward and asked cautiously as he looked at Camilla's pale face. "Scram." Camilla pasted the chef's uniform in her hand on the black cat's face before turning into a black shadow and disappearing without a trace. "Is that a chef's uniform? Why is Madam holding a chef's uniform?" Caesar looked at the uniform in confusion, but he quickly turned into a black light and chased after Camilla. After Camilla left, Meg began to teach Phyllis how to make the braised chicken and rice. This dish was actually simpler than Yangju fried rice. She only needed to put the ingredients into the pot according to the order and take them out of the pot at the right time. Phyllis learned very quickly, and Meg taught her very easily. Soon, they finished the lesson. Meg washed his hands and was about to leave. "Mr. Meg, do you think Her Highness will succeed?" Phyllis suddenly asked from behind. "Yes, she will definitely succeed." Meg looked back at her and nodded with certainty. Phyllis's nervous expression relaxed a lot. She sniffed and said, "Thank you. Then I'm going out." "You can continue," Meg said with a smile as he pulled the bicycle out of the door. He rode the bicycle to Chaos School. Today was a holiday for the students, so the guard allowed Meg to ride the bicycle into the school. When Meg rode the bicycle to the female teacher's dormitory, Luna was coming out with a stack of students' workbooks. She was surprised to see Meg, and said, "Mr. Meg, what brings you here?" "Teacher Luna, I'm here to look for you." "I didn't expect to see you here," Meg said with a smile. "Why are you looking for me?" Luna looked at Meg with confusion. "It's about the foundation. Miss Gloria came to see me just now. It's about the donation of suede clothing and winter clothes for the children. Let's go sit in the pavilion over there for a while." Luna led Meg to a nearby pavilion. Miss Gloria promised to donate 10% of the profits from suede clothing. Meg told Luna what Gloria had told him this afternoon, and handed the 2 checks to Luna. "Here are 2 checks. One is donated by Miss Gloria, and the other is a little token of my appreciation for the children," Meg said with a smile. Meg had some assets now, so he donated 10% of the profits that Gloria had given him today. "Mr. Meg, your ice cream shop has already provided a lot of help to the foundation. This money," Luna said hesitantly. "The children still have to go to school and eat. There are many places where they need to spend money. Teacher Luna, please accept it on behalf of the foundation. It was also because of you that Amy could eat her fill. Now we can help even more children." Meg shook his head and looked at her with a smile. Luna looked at Meg's gentle smile, and her heart softened. She nodded with a smile. "Yes, the children can eat their fill every day now." They don't have to beg on the streets and scavenge for food. They can also see the same smiles on their faces as ordinary children. Winter is over, and the children should be going to school. Have the school buildings been repaired? Meg asked. Luna nodded and said, the school buildings prepared for the children have been completely repaired. The construction team from the City Lord's castle is very efficient. The recruitment and training of new teachers is also in progress. I can guarantee that the children will be able to enter school next semester. They have food to eat, a house to live in, and books to study. The children are lucky to have met you. Meg nodded and sighed with emotion. Mr. Meg, I am lucky to have met you. Luna looked at Meg and said seriously. Chapter 1105. Evo City, the capital of Lanteast, was surrounded by a circle of silver metal balls as if they were wearing a collar. Other than a few fortresses, all the merfolk had retreated into Evo City, waiting for the most violent nether hurricane to strike. However, this time, Lanteast did not choose to defend passively. Instead, they chose to attack. At the northwest border, near the Cursed Seal, a merfolk looked at the yellow sand that covered the sky and let out a shrill warning conch before retreating into the underground base. A team of more than 100 merfolk dressed in colorful clothes went forward to provoke the first wave of nether sharks. They successfully angered the first wave of nether sharks, causing them to run wildly. This chase didn't last long. The mermaid disappeared completely after rushing into a long and narrow canyon. Meanwhile, the 100-odd nether sharks also rushed into the canyon, fighting to be the first to enter. Countless sound wave balls sealed off the two ends of the canyon and the top. The nether sharks stirred up a hurricane as they charged back and forth in the canyon. A metal ball appeared in the midst of the nether sharks. A dazzling silver light flashed, and the hurricane around the nether sharks within a radius of 1,000 meters disappeared instantly as if they were disarmed. A team of merfolk descended from the sky and stabbed the shining weapons in their hands into the whirlpool above the nether sharks' heads. This was an intense close combat. The nether sharks, who had lost their hurricane defense and space to maneuver, were at a disadvantage for the first time in their battle with the merfolk. The same thing happened in various places in the canyon. The merfolk used the divine weapon bestowed by God to break the nether sharks' hurricane easily, and then used the momentum to attack the nether sharks' weak points to kill or control them. Your Majesty, the front line has reported that the third wave of nether sharks has been killed, a general said excitedly as he rushed into the hall. The king, who was sitting on the throne, and the high priest, who was standing in the middle of the hall, smiled. That's great. The divine weapon bestowed by God is indeed extraordinary. The merfolk in the hall were also elated. They had never heard of such a battle report in the past 1,000 years. The king took a look at the high priest, and then at the general. Pass down my orders. Starting from the next wave of nether sharks, don't kill all of them. Choose suitable nether sharks to capture, and start building a nether shark fishing ground. Yes. The general replied and quickly left. Hold on. Let them collect the nether shark's fins and lips. That lord has important uses for them, said the high priest. Yes. After returning from Chaos School, Meg went straight to the kitchen to complete the last and most important step of Buddha jumps over the wall. He took out an old wine jar from Shakesing and placed the 30 processed ingredients into the jar in order. He then poured in the broth that he had already prepared, carefully sealed the mouth of the jar with a lotus leaf, and covered it with a small bowl. He placed the wine jar on the charcoal stove that had already been heated and simmered it. Boss, what's this? Firis looked on with a dumbstruck expression. Mag had added so many ingredients into that huge vat. What kind of mysterious dish was he trying to cook? Meg had spent an entire day making this dish. You'll know in a while, Meg said with a smile as he looked at the wine jar that was half the height of a person. His eyes were also filled with anticipation. This was the system's so-called high-class dish. He could not wait to see how high-class it was. However, to be honest, the ingredients used in this Buddha jumps over the wall were indeed very high-class. Not to mention those top-grade sea cucumbers and abalones, just the supply chain of the nether shark's fins and lips was handled by the entire Lanteast. They had spent tens of millions of gold coins to create a fishery in the sea. The cost of such a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall was 20,000 copper coins, excluding the shark's fins and lips. Because this supply chain was set up by Meg himself, it was not included in the cost listed by the system. Adding another 10,000 copper coins to the cost isn't too much at all, right? Meg thought to himself. Such a pot of Buddha jumps over the wall could feed 30 people, and each serving cost 10,000 copper coins. Even if he only sold one jar a day, he would still be making a profit of 270,000 copper coins. Actually, Meg was still a little worried about the sales of the Buddha jumps over the wall that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving. After all, the most expensive dish in the restaurant so far was the spicy grilled fish, which cost 2,500 copper coins per serving. Not to mention Chaos City, even in Rodu, it was hard to find another restaurant that cost 10,000 copper coins per serving of food. With such ingredients, it would definitely be a great tonic even if it was stewed messily. Meg convinced himself very easily. Every single one of these ingredients that he chose could be sold at a high price if they were taken out individually. After they tried this pot of Buddha jumps over the wall at night, there were still 20-odd servings left. He also planned to launch this new dish and see how the market reacted. On the second floor of the magic potion shop next door, Amy ran upstairs with an empty birdcage. She looked at Julian, who was writing something at the desk, and said, "Teacher Julian, I just used a teleportation spell on black coal, but I don't know where it was sent to. Can you guys help me find it?" "It's in the chimney," Julian replied without even raising his head. "Oh, so it went there. No wonder I couldn't find it anywhere." Amy's eyes lit up. Then, she went downstairs and stuck her head into the fireplace to take a look. "It's so dark. I can't see anything. Let's light the fire." Whoosh. The fire lit up the interior of the fireplace, bringing with it a warm light and heat. "Ah, this king's new clothes." A sharp cry rang out from the chimney, and a blackened crow fell out from the chimney. Its entire body was emitting smoke, and the few feathers that had just grown on its body were once again burnt to a crisp. Charcoal lowered its head to take a look, and its two legs stiffened as it fainted. Poor Black Coal. Did it die just like that? She reached out and pulled Black Coal out. There was a faint barbecued meat aroma in the air. She sniffed and her eyes lit up. "It smells pretty good. Let's barbecue it for a while and sprinkle some pepper and cumin. It should be ready to eat." "Are you the devil?" Black Coal opened its eyes immediately. It flapped its bald wings and tried its best to fly to a shelf at the side. It looked at Amy with fear. If it woke up a little later, it had no doubt that Amy would have roasted it and eaten it. "That's great. I thought you were dead, Black Coal," Amy said. "But why do you look so disappointed?" "Is that so? I'm pretty happy, aren't I?" "Master, let's talk nicely. Can you put down the wand first?" I'm a little scared." "Don't be scared. It'll be over soon." A smile appeared on Amy's face. She walked over to Black Coal, who was trembling on the shelf with the wand in her hand. "Amy, didn't you say that today is Mia's birthday? Do you want to prepare a gift with me?" 1111 asked with a smile as she interjected from the side. Chapter 1106. Most of the buildings in the Bastille prison were built underground. However, very few people knew that the highest security prison in the Bastille prison wasn't at the 100th floor in the deepest part of the prison. Instead, it was at the 7th floor in the middle. There was only one cell on each floor of these 7 floors. Layers of magic restrictions and hard rocks and steel that were dozens of meters thick formed the most indestructible prison on the Norland continent. Those who were locked up on these 7 floors were all powerhouses who had once ruled over a region. Most of them had been locked up here since 100 years ago. They were labeled as war criminals and imprisoned here. On the 50th floor, the 4th floor of the 7 central floors, a pot-bellied middle-aged prison guard and a young prison guard in his 20s were patrolling the corridor. They got tired of walking back and forth in the 10-meter-long corridor very quickly. The young prison guard went up to the middle-aged prison guard and curiously asked, "Boss, who are the people locked up here? Why do we need so many restrictions? And why does the warden have to come and patrol this place personally every day?" The thick and heavy metal door was shut tightly, and there was no way to see what was going on inside the prison. Even the entry and exit of food was through a small teleportation portal. As a newbie who was just assigned to the Bastille prison, he was very interested in the people he was guarding. Of course, the most important thing was to listen to the legends of ruthless people to pass the time. The middle-aged prison guard was also bored out of his mind. Only the newbies would fight to listen to the stories that the old people were already sick of hearing. He mysteriously said, "The person locked up in this prison is Ruthless Rex, whose name shook the entire Norland continent 100 years ago. You might not be familiar with this name, but you should have heard of the Hairless Monk, right? Hairless Monk. The Hairless Monk who massacred a human town and annihilated a demon in the legends." As expected, the young prison guard's eyes widened in disbelief. That's him. The middle-aged prison guard was obviously very satisfied with the young man's expression. He continued, "This Hairless Monk is a half-demon. It's said that his mother gave birth to him after being defiled by a demon. She was beaten to death by humans because she gave birth to a half-demon. He survived by luck, but because of that, he hated humans and demons immensely. He gradually grew up, and his strength became stronger and stronger. He walked the continent, and his actions were both righteous and evil. Finally, one day, his strength was strong enough to destroy the demon clan that had once defiled his mother. He did not hesitate to go to his father's door and exterminate his father's clan. Then, he returned to his mother's tribe and massacred the entire town. Not even a child was spared. From then on, he gained the title of the Hairless Monk, also known as the Lawless Monk. His actions throughout his life. The middle-aged warden's saliva was flying everywhere as he spoke. The young warden at the side was also intoxicated as he listened. Although the Hairless Monk was brutal in his actions, he could be said to be merciless. It was just that he had implicated too many innocent people. At the end of the racial war, he single-handedly faced off against 4 10th-tier powerhouses and killed one of them. He was heavily injured and captured, and had been imprisoned here for almost 100 years. The young prison guard was a little scared when he heard that. He whispered, "Boss, this Hairless Monk is so powerful. Is our cell still reliable? Could it be? What's there to worry about?" After being imprisoned for 100 years, his vitality had long dried up. It's already a miracle that he could survive until now. How could he still have the strength to break out of the cell? Moreover, our cell is indestructible. There are 7 iron doors inside and outside, and each one is thicker than the last. There are also all kinds of magical restrictions on them. Even the Hairless Monk at his peak wouldn't be able to get out, let alone now. Bam! A thick iron door crashed onto the wall, and a huge hole appeared on the wall. The iron door turned into a pile of scrap metal. There was even a clear footprint in the center. 6 thumbs. The alarm was instantly blaring. The voices of the 2 prison guards stopped abruptly. They stared at the opened door with their eyes and mouths wide open. A burly bald man walked out slowly from the passageway. He had dark brown skin, and looked like a middle-aged man. He glanced at the 2 prison guards who were leaning against the wall with trembling legs. He turned and walked towards the passageway. He lifted his leg and kicked the passageway door that was more than a meter thick and covered with restrictions. He looked left and right, and mumbled, "What exactly is that smell?" Then, he disappeared at the corner of the passageway. Just now, that. The prison guard's voice was trembling. First-class incident. The Hairless Monk has broken out of prison. The Hairless Monk has broken out of prison. The middle-aged prison guard grabbed the communication device on his chest and screamed at the top of his voice. "Wow! It smells so good." At the entrance of the kitchen, all the girls looked at the wine jar that had just been opened with the lotus leaf. A human aroma surged out crazily and seeped into their hearts instantly, making their eyes light up. "Father, is this the new dish you made? It's awesome." Amy squinted her eyes and stuck out her little pink tongue to lick her lips. She stared at the wine jar eagerly. Seafood, meat, mushrooms. It's obviously a pot of messy stew, but the aroma is so alluring. After taking a careful sniff, the distinct layering is intoxicating. "Boss is really amazing. Yabemia also looked at Meg with admiration. As expected, only this kind of Buddha jumps over the wall is worthy of the name Buddha jumps over the wall. Meg took a deep sniff, and a satisfied smile appeared on his face. It was tens of thousands of times more delicious than the Buddha jumps over the wall that he had eaten before. Meg didn't let the system isolate the aroma this time. Instead, he let the aroma out as it was. The customers outside the restaurant were curious about what kind of delicacy the Buddha jumps over the wall that Mr. Mac was releasing tonight. Suddenly, an alluring aroma wafted out of the restaurant. "What's this? It smells so good." This special aroma immediately attracted the attention of the customers. Everyone craned their necks to look in the direction of the restaurant and couldn't help but start swallowing their saliva. According to my experience of tasting the restaurant's menu, this aroma doesn't belong to any of the delicacies on the menu. It's very likely that it's the new Buddha jumps over the wall that's being released today. Harrison stroked his chin and said with certainty, "Mr. Mac is so mean. There's still half an hour before the restaurant opens for business, and he's releasing the aroma to tempt us. This is too much. Yeah, it's fine if it's just an ordinary aroma, but this aroma. Gululu. Isn't it going to kill us?" The customers started to rub their stomachs and howl with grief and anticipation. Bam! Right at this moment, a figure descended from the sky and landed on the ground in front of the restaurant. The rock that he landed on shattered instantly, and the debris spread out in all directions like a spiderweb. The restaurant was instantly silent. Everyone looked at the bald man who descended from the sky in confusion. This fellow seemed to have jumped out of Lantiste prison. Here. That bald man raised his head and looked at the restaurant. His eyes narrowed slightly, and he took 2 steps forward before lifting his right foot again. Chapter 1107. The bald burly man who jumped out of the Bastille prison lifted his leg and was about to kick the door of Mammis without another word, scaring the customers who were lining up outside the restaurant. The alarm in the direction of the Bastille prison had already sounded. It was just a wall away, and the sound was exceptionally loud and piercing. Everyone was guessing what kind of ruthless person could escape from the Bastille prison. The action of kicking the door made everyone's heart jump to their throats. Could it be that this bald burly man who escaped from the prison had a feud with Mr. Mac? Sargeras had already walked out of the line with his foldable chair, and the Burning Legion followed closely behind. The knights in the line held the long swords at their waists, while the magic casters took out their wands. No matter who this fellow was, if he wanted to destroy Mammis or Mr. Mac, then he would be blaspheming the sacred ground in their hearts. A thin layer of blue ice appeared in front of the wooden door. That bald burly man lifted his leg and kicked the thin layer of ice. The metal door that was more than a meter thick and was covered with restrictions was flattened by a single kick. This thin layer of ice seemed so thin compared to the wooden door behind it. Crack. A crisp cracking sound was heard, and the expected scene of the door turning into powder did not appear. Countless cracks appeared on the thin layer of ice, but it persisted for a while before crumbling into powder. Meanwhile, the strength of the bald burly man's kick was also perfectly neutralized by the ice, and it landed on the first step. Julian, who was wearing a black robe, walked out of the magic potion shop slowly with a wand in his hand. He looked at the bald burly man standing at the restaurant's entrance, and narrowed his eyes with a solemn expression. With a hoarse voice, he said, "You are the hairless monk." The hairless monk also turned around to look at Julian in surprise. His black eyes landed on Julian, and he seemed to be in deep thought. However, he quickly turned his gaze back to the wooden door in front of him, and lifted his hand to slap the wooden door again. "I don't care if you have hair or not. My disciple's door is not something you can just slap on." Right at this moment, an irascible voice sounded from afar. A streak of red light flashed past the customers in the queue, and crashed into the hairless monk. The magic caster's staff emerged from the red light, and directly smacked down on the hairless monk's head. The hairless monk retracted his hand that was extended halfway and raised his hand to block in front of him. Boom! A muffled sound was heard. The hairless monk took 2 steps back, and a red mark appeared on his brown arm. The red light also faded away, and Crassus landed on the ground lightly. He stuck his magic caster's staff, which was taller than a person, on the ground to stabilize himself. He stared at the hairless monk's head for a while, and couldn't help but laugh out loud. I say, it's been 100 years, and your hair still hasn't grown at all. Hairless monk. Could it be the legendary hairless monk? Someone in the crowd exclaimed. Many people revealed a panicked expression, and stepped back instinctively. Clearly, they had heard of the hairless monk before. However, even if they hadn't heard of him, they could basically judge the terrifying power of this burly man after seeing how the two legendramags, Julian and Crassus, attacked that bald burly man from the back without injuring him at all. Who's the hairless monk? Can someone give us some information? Someone asked curiously. Since the two legendramags, Julian and Crassus, had come out, there was naturally no need for them to make a move. They just had to be a bystander. Speaking of this hairless monk, very soon, storyteller Carl began to recite his clapper, and started to impart some knowledge to the audience. Emergency attack approaching. Defense overloaded. Crisis temporarily averted. Just as the bald burly man was about to kick the door, Meg had already received the emergency alert. He hadn't even put down the lotus leaf in his hand when he looked in the direction of the door in surprise. Who was it that chose such a time to knock on the door? Meg's two masters were both here at this time. However, he quickly sensed an unfamiliar and powerful aura outside. It was a 10th tier powerhouse. This made him a little vigilant. A 10th tier powerhouse knocking on the door was something that had never happened before. Could it be that the powerhouse from the Red Dragon tribe was here to cause trouble? What a powerful aura. Elizabeth stepped in front of MIA and looked in the direction of the door nervously. That wasn't the aura of Julian and Crassus, but the strength of the aura wasn't below that of the Great Elder. It was definitely a rare expert. Is there a fight outside? You must be super lively. I'm going to take a look. Amy picked up a small stool at the side and ran towards the door. Amy, wait. Meg threw the lotus leaf aside and followed Amy to the door. With Crassus and Julian around, he wasn't really worried about Amy's safety. However, he was also curious about which 10th tier powerhouse was knocking on the door. It's you. After being knocked back 2 steps by Crassus, the hairless monk looked at Crassus. His gaze paused on the magic staff in his hand for a while, and a strange expression appeared on his face as he spoke in a slightly low voice. I didn't expect you to still remember me after so many years. Crassus pursed his lips. I remember this. The hairless monk looked at that magic staff. Crassus stroked his short beard. 100 years ago, I was in my prime and handsome period. Now that I'm old, it's no big deal that you can't recognize me. He means that you're not even as recognizable as a wooden club. Julian rolled his eyes at the side. The customers who had retreated 20 meters away raised their heads and tried their best not to laugh out loud. Crassus' expression froze, and he put his hand down. He looked at the hairless monk, and said, Since you've already escaped from that prison, why didn't you find a place to hide? Why did you have to come and smash my disciple's door? Julian's expression also turned cold. The blue light on the magic staff in his hand flickered as if magic could be released at any time. There's something I want in here. The hairless monk took a deep sniff, and a hint of indulgence appeared on his face. He looked at Crassus and Julian, and a hint of murderous intent flashed across his eyes. He coldly said, I'll leave after I get it. If you stop me again, I'll kill you. A chilly aura spread out in all directions from Julian's feet. Frost appeared on the ground, and a white path extended toward the hairless monk. The magic staff in Crassus' hand also lit up with a dazzling red flame. The intense aura rose into a heat wave, and it seemed as if even the void was going to be burned through. The customers at the restaurant's entrance retreated another 10 meters. In a battle between 10th tier powerhouses, a slight ripple could result in one's death. There was complete silence in the surroundings. Creak. Right at this moment, the restaurant's door opened outwards slowly. A little loli stuck half of her body out while hugging a small stool. There was also a fat orange kitten that squeezed its head out from beside her feet. Chapter 1108. Two pairs of bright and clear eyes stared at the hairless monk and Crassus, who were standing at the door. The hairless monk, who was about to make a move, was also stunned. He was a little lost in thought as he looked at the little lowly who stuck half of her body out of the door. Such a small person was actually so exquisite and adorable. Those big eyes were even sparkling, as if the most beautiful thing in the world was hidden in them. After staying in that pitch-black prison for 100 years, he had forgotten the sea of stars and many other things. His entire life was accompanied by suffering and hatred. He watched his own mother being beaten to death. He killed his own father and his clansmen with his own hands. He killed everyone who made a move and cheered for his mother's death. Back then, he didn't know what was beautiful. Until he killed all his enemies, he even lost his goal to live on. Without a goal and desire, there was no difference between being alive and being dead. Therefore, he failed and was locked up in the Bastille prison. In these 100 years, he had never tried to break out of the prison. To him, the world outside the prison was just a bigger prison. Why should he jump from a small prison to another big one? Until just now, he felt a mysterious calling. He had already forgotten how long it had been since he felt his desire so strongly. Following the calling of his heart, he left the prison that he had stayed in for 100 years and came to the outside world. He found this restaurant that was only one wall away from the Bastille prison. The fragrance in the air was so clear. He was sure that it was this fragrance that led him here. Perhaps it was some kind of spirit medicine. No matter what it was, he wanted to get that mysterious fragrance. This strong feeling was almost out of his control. However, when he saw this little girl who stuck half of her body out of the half-opened door, he felt his heart that was as hard as stone suddenly tremble. It was as if countless mud casings had fallen off and started to beat. All the words about beauty should be used to describe cute little people like her, right? Those eyes that were as pure as the stars made him put down his hand subconsciously. He was actually worried that he would scare her. Amy's big eyes turned, and she said softly in embarrassment, "Did I disturb you guys? Don't worry, you guys can continue. I'll be very quiet on the side." After saying that, she slowly moved out from behind the door, put down the little stool, and sat down obediently. She scooped Ugly Duckling into her arms and rested her head on its head. Then, she smiled, and said, "You can continue now." The guests, who had been looking at Amy worriedly as she walked out, suddenly had black lines appear on their faces. This lady's courage was really unrivaled. Crassus and Urian's eyelids twitched. Their precious disciple was good at everything, but he liked to watch a good show. Furthermore, he wasn't afraid of making a big deal out of it. He even dared to sit in the front row with a small stool. This made it difficult for them to do anything. The door of the restaurant opened, and a rich aroma wafted out. Lex's gaze became determined again. The thing he was looking for was indeed inside. "I'm the owner of this restaurant. What can I do for you?" Meg asked calmly as he opened the half-closed door completely. He stood at the door, looked at this burly bald man, and asked calmly with vigilance and wariness in his eyes. Since Amy had already moved a small stool out, he naturally couldn't hide at the back anymore. To be able to make Crassus and Julian so nervous, this fellow must be a ruthless character. Barefooted, wearing tattered clothes, a shiny bald head, tanned skin, and a muscular figure. Coupled with the ear-piercing siren next door, Meg could basically determine this person's background. To be able to escape from the Bastille prison, which was known for its sturdiness, this hairless monk's ability naturally couldn't be compared to a normal 10th-tier powerhouse. "Mr. Mac, bring little Amy and step back a little. This old thing is very bad," Crassus said as he placed his magic staff horizontally in front of Lex. A small, ice-blue ice wall had already risen in front of Amy, blocking her behind it in a hemispherical shape. "I want that thing." Lex looked at Meg. He could tell that this man and that little girl should be father and daughter, so his tone became slightly calmer as he spoke while pointing at the restaurant. "That thing." Meg was a little puzzled. What was in the restaurant that was worth this bald big shot breaking out of prison to retrieve? Crassus and Julian were also a little puzzled. Since this fellow's target wasn't Amy, then what could it be? "Do you want to eat Buddha jumps over the wall? It has a super tempting aroma, right?" It was made by my father. Amy stood up from the small stool, looked at Lex, and smilingly said, "If you want to eat Buddha jumps over the wall, you can come in and have a seat. My father made a lot of it. As long as you pay, you can eat it." Buddha jumps over the wall? Pay? Lex looked at Amy as he touched his big bald head. So that thing with a tempting aroma was called Buddha jumps over the wall, and it was made by this man. But what was money? Looking at Amy's pure eyes, he spread out his hands, shook his head embarrassedly, and said, "I don't have money." "You don't have money?" Amy knitted her delicate eyebrows and looked at Lex's bare feet and tattered clothes. She sighed and turned to look at Meg, saying, "Father, this grandpa looks so pitiful. Can we give him a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall?" Lex put down his hand and looked at Meg. Pitiful? Meg stared at this scene with his eyes wide open. For the first time, he felt that his brain wasn't enough. Did Amy's foodie mindset hit the nail on the head? Did this hairless monk really come for Buddha jumps over the wall? Looking at Lex's expression, this inference was probably true. Breaking out of prison just for food? Crassus was also stunned for a moment. He sized up Lex for a while. This fellow seemed to be a little different from the god of slaughter in his impression. Could it be that he became stupid after being locked up for 100 years? Shocking. The famous god of slaughter, hairless monk, broke out of Bastille prison just to eat Mr. Mac's new dish, Buddha jumps over the wall? Isn't this world too crazy? The customers opened their mouths wide. They still couldn't believe what was happening. Meg coughed softly and opened the restaurant's door. Since that's the case, Amy is right. There's no need to fight anymore. Everyone, come in and have a seat. Drink a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall to calm your nerves. This matter will be over after that. Mr. Mac, Crassus was still holding his magic caster's staff horizontally as he looked at Lex cautiously. "Master Crassus, don't worry. He's not a bad person." Amy pulled Crassus' sleeve and made him move his magic caster's staff away. She then smiled and waved at Lex, saying, "Come in." Chapter 1109. First Level Incident. The hairless monk has broken out of prison. Lock down the Bastille prison. Ear-piercing alarms rang throughout the Bastille prison. Magic barriers rose from the prison, and all the prisoners in the active area were sent back to the prison immediately. The prison guards ran in the corridor angrily and used the batons in their hands to teach the agitated prisoners a lesson. "Warden, what should we do?" Deputy Warden Jonathan asked nervously as he looked at the empty tunnel entrance. The heavy metal door was nailed to the wall hundreds of meters away. The metal door frame was completely distorted. One could imagine what kind of terrifying force it had endured. Beside him, a tall and thin warden wearing a black robe and a black hat scrutinized the door frame and the deep footprints at the side. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Where did he go?" "Towards the Aiden Square. Someone said they saw him jump over," Jonathan quickly replied. Someone had successfully broken out of prison. This was a big deal. The Bastille prison had been established for 100 years, and there had never been a successful prison break. Moreover, it was a 10th-tier felon. Report to the City Lord's Castle and the Grey Temple that the hairless monk's ability is still at its peak. Request for backup. Wesley walked towards the Aiden Square. "Yes," Jonathan replied. He turned and left quickly after seeing the warden who had already climbed over the high wall. The hairless monk at his peak was undoubtedly an extremely dangerous figure to ordinary people. Only the Grey Temple and the City Lord's Castle could send out the strongest capture team to capture him. At the entrance of the restaurant, the customers were all dumbfounded as they looked at the door that was closing slowly. Previously, they were at daggers drawn, and a battle between legendary powerhouses was about to start. In the end, because of Little Boss's cuteness and Mr. Mac's new product, the matter was resolved peacefully just like that. I say, was that really the hairless monk just now? Given his character of massacring cities and exterminating families, did he really give up just for a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall? Although I don't think it's very logical, judging from the reaction of the Bastille prison and the fact that Lord Crassus and Lord Julian fought him to a draw, It doesn't make sense if he's not the hairless monk. Although I don't know how powerful the hairless monk is, one thing I can be sure of is that Mr. Mac's new product this time will definitely be very delicious, the customers discussed in low voices, and for a moment, no one dared to approach the restaurant. Amy led Rex into the restaurant, and Crassus and Julian followed them into the restaurant. One of them stood behind Amy to protect her, while the other followed behind her. They were looking at the hairless monk warily. Back then, they had all fought with this person, so they knew his capricious character and powerful strength. Lex followed behind Amy with her hands clasped behind her. Her gaze swept across the murals on the walls of the restaurant. The murals of various races were reflected in her eyes, and she became a little absent-minded. In the blink of an eye, 100 years had passed. This world had changed a lot. Elizabeth stood in front of the other ladies, and looked at Rex warily. She had heard everyone's conversation earlier. The hairless monk's name was extremely well known on the Norland continent, so she had naturally heard of him. "Everyone, please take a seat. We are about to have dinner too. If you don't mind, let's have dinner together." Meg turned around with a smile. He wasn't flustered at all. After all, he was someone who had seen the world, and he had even inherited Alex's memories. Hence, he felt that all kinds of experts were of the same level. 2 tables were put together, and there were all kinds of delicacies on them. They were indeed about to have dinner. "Then we'll have to add another table and 3 chairs. Yarbemia walked out from behind Elizabeth, and moved another table over to put it together. Then, she moved another 3 chairs over. "You can sit here," Amy said as she pointed to a seat in the corner as she looked at Rex. Rex's gaze swept across everyone, and finally landed on Amy. There wasn't a hint of fear in the little one's pure eyes. After hesitating for a while, he still sat down according to Amy's arrangement. Crassus and Julian sat on either side of Rex. They looked at each other and didn't say a word. With 2 grand mags holding the fort, Meg gestured for the ladies to take their seats. He then walked towards the kitchen. The Buddha jumps over the wall was only half opened, and the soup hadn't been scooped out yet. 10 black pottery bowls were lined up in a row. Using a large spoon, Rex scooped out a spoonful of the thick soup and poured it into the bowls. Then, he filled each bowl with shark's fin, abalone, and other dishes. There were 30 kinds of side dishes, and he didn't lack any of them. This was to ensure that everyone could taste the complete Buddha jumps over the wall. "MIA, Barbara!" Meg shouted towards the outside. The 2 of them quickly walked in and helped to carry out the Buddha jumps over the wall that was filled with soup. The thick brown soup was steaming hot, and the aroma of the wine assailed their nostrils. It went straight into their hearts. The aroma of the various ingredients competed with each other, and everyone's eyes lit up. "This is the aroma." Rex looked at the black pottery bowl in front of him in disbelief. The rich aroma wafted over along with the steam. It was the aroma that he was looking for. It really wasn't a spirit medicine, but a dish. There were various ingredients in the thick soup. They were visibly soft and mushy, but they still maintained the same shape and didn't fall apart because of the stewing. In the past 100 years, he had almost forgotten the taste of food. Even though the Bastille prison would provide him with a fixed amount of food every day, he would only eat a little when he thought of it. He would chew mechanically and swallow the tasteless food into his stomach. Just a little bit was enough for him to live for a very long time. The last time he ate was about a month ago. The entire table of food, the bright colors, and the aroma that assailed his nostrils gave him a sense of anticipation. "Then I'm going to dig in." Amy was the first to pick up the spoon. She scooped up a spoonful of thick soup and blew on it before putting it into her mouth. Gulp. After swallowing the soup, Amy's face revealed a pleasantly surprised expression. She shook her head from side to side and happily mumbled, "It's so delicious." After saying that, she scooped up a piece of shark's fin. The transparent shark's fin was as soft as jelly. She put her mouth forward and sucked, and it slid into her mouth with a slurp. "Woo! It's delicious and fun. This is so interesting," Amy said happily. She picked up the spoon and searched for the next ingredient in the thick soup as if she was digging for treasure. Little Amy is enjoying it so much. Everyone swallowed their saliva and picked up their spoons one after another. Rex finally retracted his gaze from Amy. He hesitated for a moment before picking up the spoon. He held the spoon clumsily and scooped a spoonful of thick soup into his mouth. Chapter 11:10. The delicious broth slowly seeped into his taste buds. His sluggish taste buds seemed to be nourished by the spring rain as they gradually awakened. The freshness of the seafood, the richness of the meat, all sorts of ingredients appeared one by one and blossomed at the tip of his tongue. There was a taste within a taste. Lex felt that all the flavors he had tasted in the past 100 years could not compare to this mouthful of broth. He seemed to see large fish swimming in the sea, wild beasts running freely in the forest, mushrooms growing on withered trees after the spring rain. What a lively scene. His heart, which had been dead for 100 years, could not help but start beating along with these images. The dark clouds of hatred had dispersed. If his empty heart was filled with these beautiful things, it seemed like a good thing. The rich aroma of meat wantonly declared that he was a mouthful of broth. However, it was not greasy. It was just right for him to want another mouthful. The broth slid down his throat and moistened his throat and esophagus. A slightly numb feeling rose from his stomach and spread to his limbs and bones. A part of it continued to rise until it reached the top of his head. His scalp was slightly numb, as if something was about to break out of its shell. The slight numbness did not bring him any discomfort. Instead, it made him feel very comfortable. It was an indescribable feeling. Vaguely, he seemed to see a young woman holding a baby, revealing a peaceful smile. "Mother," Lex muttered softly in his heart. She was completely immersed in the delicious food. Crassus and Julian looked at Lex, who was in a daze after drinking a mouthful of broth. They also picked up their spoons and drank a mouthful of broth. Their eyes lit up and they were instantly immersed in the delicious broth. "Oh!" Yarbemia, who had just drunk a mouthful of broth, stood up immediately. A golden dragon tail had already uncontrollably darted out and a numb feeling spread throughout her body. Very fine golden dragon scales also appeared on her cheeks and wrists. The dragon horns on the top of her head turned a bright gold, making her look even more exquisite and beautiful. Mia was still holding the spoon in her hand. She was stunned when she saw the scales on her wrists. She hurriedly reached out to touch her cheeks. When she touched the scales on her cheeks, she panicked and said anxiously, "What should I do? What should I do? There are scales on my face too." Everyone was also stunned when they saw this scene. Mia usually only transformed when she was eating Ruggiamo. They did not expect her to transform into a dragon tail after drinking a mouthful of broth today. There were also some fine scales on her face and hands. "What beautiful dragon scales. Big sister Mia, don't worry. They're very beautiful and not scary at all." Amy looked at Mia and comforted her. "That's right. Don't worry too much, Mia. Perhaps the dragon scales can be stored away like the tail." Furthermore, just as Amy had said, the dragon scales on Mia's cheeks looked thin and fine, and there was a long and narrow triangular band on each side of her cheeks. It added a wild beauty to her, and didn't make her look scary at all. "This is atavism." Elizabeth stood up and stared at the fine scales on Mia's cheeks in astonishment. This was something that would only happen when the dragon origin in her body was stimulated. She had not used the dragon origin left by her father yet. Because of a mouthful of broth, Mia had taken the first step to becoming a true giant dragon. Atavism? Mia looked at Elizabeth in confusion. Crassus looked up at Mia with a smile, and said, "Miss Mia, you are indeed very lucky. Atavism is 1 in a million among half-races, especially giant dragons. Atavism means that you will obtain some of the dragon's abilities, powerful strength, or a long lifespan. These are all things that others yearn for. Then will Sister Mia become a true giant dragon? A giant dragon that can fly in the sky like Sister Elizabeth?" Amy asked curiously. She can only maintain this form for now. However, this broth seems to have the effect of promoting atavism. If Miss Mia continues to consume it, there is a possibility that she will become a true giant dragon one day, Crassus said as he looked at the Buddha jumps over the wall in front of him. This was a wonderful bowl of soup. Even he felt energized after drinking it. It was as if the mental strength in his mind had been cleansed. It was an indescribable comfort. It was a very nourishing soup. Is it really not scary? If it doesn't fade, will it scare the customers? Yarbemia was still worried. She touched her cheeks. She was most concerned about the customers and not the powerful abilities she might obtain. It will fade. Don't worry. Elizabeth patted her shoulder gently. Okay. Mia looked at Elizabeth and calmed down. She looked at the Buddha jumps over the wall hesitantly. Drink it. It will be good for you, Elizabeth said softly as she saw through her thoughts. Then I will continue to drink it. Mia's eyes lit up. She picked up the spoon and scooped another spoonful of soup into her mouth. She revealed a sweet smile and praised, "It's really delicious." Seeing that everyone was intoxicated by the deliciousness of the Buddha jumps over the wall, Meg did not continue watching. He picked up the spoon and drank a mouthful of soup. Then, he tasted the shark fin and meat. The aroma of the wine permeated the broth and the ingredients. The meat was tender and moist. It had a strong meaty aroma, but it was meaty but not greasy. The taste of the various ingredients had already intertwined. There was flavor within flavor. When chewed, it was soft but not rotten. This is the real Buddha jumps over the wall. The system did not deceive me. Meg praised in his heart. His painstaking efforts were not in vain. After tasting this delicious finished product, he instantly felt that everything was worth it. It's in here. Wesley stood still outside Amy's. He gripped the long saber at his waist tightly and squinted his eyes slightly. He could clearly sense the hairless monk's aura inside. Apart from that, there were also two very powerful magic casters' auras. He had long heard that the two great magic casters, Crassus and Julian, were in Chaos City now. They even took in the same disciple in this Aiden Square. Now, it seemed that the two great magic casters inside were very likely to be those two. The hairless monk, who had escaped from prison, was enough to give them a headache. If those two great magic casters, who had always been unreasonable, were to get involved, not to mention the Bastille prison, even the entire Chaos City might not be able to clear things up. How's the situation? A green-eyed wind foal stopped at the entrance of the restaurant. Michael got off the horse and asked Wesley. Seems like they went in, Roland said as he walked out from a ball of dim light and looked into the restaurant. Chapter 11:11. The City Lord of Chaos City, Michael, the Lord of the Grey Temple, Roland, and the Warden of the Bastille Prison, Wesley, appeared outside Mammoth at the same time. The members of the Grey Temple and the City Lord's castle guards who rushed over quickly sealed off the surroundings of Mammoth. All the unrelated people were moved 200 meters away. Such a formation made the situation tense all of a sudden. What's going on? Why did the City Lord and the Lord of the Grey Temple suddenly appear? And they even brought so many people with them? The onlookers who did not know what was going on looked around curiously. The alarm in the Bastille prison was still ringing. Seeing the cold expressions of the people from the Grey Temple, the situation became even more suspicious. Mammoth, who had won the top 6 spots on the Delicious Cuisine rankings, was in the limelight recently. Any small matter would become the topic of conversation after a meal. After the restaurant's door was closed, it was quiet inside. The regulars were also curious about what was going on inside. Would they still be able to eat delicious food tonight? City Lord, are we going to attack by force? Wesley asked Michael. He did not explain further about the prison break. Since he could break through the prison's restrictions and defenses, it means that his abilities are still at their peak. If we attack here, we will not be able to bear the consequences, unless... Michael's voice stopped. Unless Crassus and Julian are on our side, Roland continued. However, looking at his expression, it was obvious that even he did not believe that such a thing would happen. Wesley glanced at the surrounding residents. They were used to a peaceful life, and had developed the habit of watching a commotion. If a fight really broke out here, many people would probably die from accidental injuries. A battle between 10th-tier experts was a life-and-death battle. It was not a child's play. Once they attacked, the situation would be very difficult to control. Should we clear the place? Wesley asked again. Clear everything within a 500-meter radius. Try to make as little noise as possible. Michael nodded. He looked at Mammy Restaurant's signboard with a smile, and said, Boss Mag, this is a good place to negotiate. Since they haven't started a fight, then it's best if we don't have to. Everyone who was eating in the restaurant could clearly hear the commotion outside. Isn't this affecting my business? If you tear down my restaurant, how am I going to sue you? Meg looked back at the direction of the door and raised his eyebrows. He then looked at the three big shots who were eating calmly. Worried that the people outside would attack indiscriminately because they didn't understand the situation, he stood up with a smile and said, It seems that there are more guests. I'll go take a look. Meg opened the door of the restaurant, and Michael withdrew his hand that was about to knock on the door. He looked at Meg with a smile and said, Mr. Mack, I heard that there's a special guest in the restaurant. He's eating inside. Meg knew who he was asking about, so he didn't hide it. Someone who could make Crassus and Julian so vigilant was definitely a ruthless character. The City Lord's castle and the Grey Temple had come looking for him. Of course, it was best to let them deal with it themselves. He was just a restaurant owner. Michael, Lauren, and Wesley looked into the restaurant. There were 3 tables that were placed together. A burly, bald man had his back facing the direction of the door. He was sitting at the same table as the restaurant staff. He was eating quietly with a strange expression on his face. This was one of the top 3 ruthless people in the Bastille prison. He was an infamous demon. After successfully escaping from prison by violent means, he was actually sitting at the staff table of the restaurant just a wall away and eating his dinner quietly. Even with their status and experience, the 3 of them were shocked by this scene. Meg looked at the Grey Temple team members who were chasing the customers and onlookers out of the restaurant. He coughed softly and said, Mayor, Lord of the Grey Temple, let's talk nicely. My customers are still waiting for dinner. It's not easy for them to queue for so long. There's no need to chase them away. There's no need to clear the place first. Michael raised his hand, and the people who were clearing the place immediately stopped. He looked at Meg with a smile and said, It smells so good. Mr. Mack is releasing a new dish again, right? We're old acquaintances, and it's just in time for dinner. Why don't you let Roland and me in to eat something to fill our stomachs? Just add 2 stools. Crassus and Master Julian are Amy's teachers. It's our duty to respect our teachers. Amy felt pity for that old man and let him in to eat something to warm himself up. Mayor and Lord of the Grey Temple didn't prepare any sumptuous dinner. I'm afraid we won't be able to serve you well. Meg's face revealed some hesitation. What a joke. Buddha jumps over the wall was 10,000 copper coins per serving. It didn't matter if he was the mayor or the Grey Temple. There was no way he could get a free meal. Wesley looked at Mag with a weird expression. This restaurant owner was really brave. Normal restaurant owners would be more than happy to hear that the city lord and lord of the palace were coming over for a meal, but this one looked like he wasn't willing to do so. This stingy fox, Michael cursed under his breath. He nodded with a smile, and said, Mr. Mack, don't worry. Just remember what Roland and I ate. We'll settle the bill. How can I do that? I'll remember it well. Mayor, Grey Temple, please come in, Meg said with a smile and gave up his seat at the door. Michael and Roland looked at each other and walked into the restaurant. Meg turned around and closed the door behind him. Meg added 2 more stools for Michael and Roland to sit beside Crassus and Julian. He filled a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall for each of them. He returned to his seat and sat down. He picked up his bowl and ate quietly. The hairless monk, Crassus, and Julian weren't affected at all. They continued to eat. However, the others obviously weren't so calm. After all, Michael and Roland were the mayor and the Grey Temple's Grey Temple master. It was difficult to meet such people normally. Now that they were actually sitting at the same table and eating together, they couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Lord Crassus, Lord Julian, how have you been? Michael asked with a smile. Millimeter, pretty good. Crassus nodded, and then continued to eat. Julian, on the other hand, grunted coldly. He didn't even raise his head. Michael knew these two people's tempers, so he didn't take it to heart. His gaze landed on Rex, who was holding a spoon and carefully drinking the soup in the black terracotta bowl in front of him. He squinted his eyes slightly, and smilingly said, "Seems like Bastie's food needs to be improved. Otherwise, if everyone learns to go out for dinner, it won't be easy to manage them." Roland had already picked up the spoon and drank a mouthful of soup. He had an intoxicated and blissful expression on his face. After a while, he sighed, "It's not difficult to improve it, but to improve it to this extent, I'm afraid those chefs can't do it even if they work hard for their entire lives." Chapter 11-12. Michael, who was trying to test Lex, was stunned for a moment. He turned around to look at Roland, who was eating happily with a spoon. As the Lord of the Grey Temple, Roland had always presented himself as a strict and authoritative person. Who would have thought that he would start eating in such a situation? Is it really that good? Michael was a little doubtful, but seeing that Rex didn't seem to care about him, he scooped a spoonful of soup and put it into his mouth. Fuck. The meaty aroma of the soup spread crazily in his mouth. At that moment, there were almost no words in his mind that could describe this strong impact. After a moment of amazement, the rich layers of flavors began to show. They overlapped with each other, but didn't disturb each other. The freshness of the ocean, the wild game of the mountains. Everyone couldn't help but be immersed in it. This is too delicious. After swallowing a mouthful of soup, there was only one thought left in Michael's mind. He had never tasted such a delicious soup before. It had completely overturned his understanding of soup. It turned out that one could taste such rich layers of flavors in just a mouthful of soup. It could be so amazing. Vivian would definitely like it too. Also, it seems to be quite nutritious. I'll bring her here next time, Michael thought to himself. The first thing he thought of was still his daughter. After drinking a mouthful of soup, he couldn't help but eat a mouthful of meat. The rich meaty meat was soft but not rotten. It was as if it had been simmered with the best wine in the world. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it became. He almost bit his tongue. Such a delicacy is really rare. It's rare in the world, rare in the world. Michael praised in his heart. He was completely immersed in the taste of Buddha jumps over the wall with every mouthful of soup and meat. Lord Roland, who was at the side, wasn't much different. So the City Lord and the Lord of the Grey Temple are similar to us when they come across good food. Mia sized up the two important figures in her heart carefully. They looked quite down-to-earth when they were immersed in the food. In the small restaurant, there were 5 10th-tier powerhouses gathered. The City Lord of Chaos City, the Lord of the Grey Temple, the Lord of the Fire, the Lord of Ice, and Rex, the hairless monk who had just escaped from Bastille prison. Because of a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall, the 5 of them sat together and ate harmoniously. If they didn't see this scene with their own eyes, they wouldn't believe it. Just like Wesley and the people from Grey Temple outside the restaurant, who were anxiously observing the movements in the restaurant. They were just waiting for an order from inside to prepare to launch a strong attack. Who would have thought that their own city lord and temple master were so engrossed in the delicious Buddha jumps over the wall that they could not extricate themselves from? Ding! Lex's spoon hit the bottom of the bowl and made a soft sound. There was only a thin layer of soup left in the empty bowl. He picked up the bowl and finished the last bit of soup before putting it down. He wiped the sweat off his forehead and seriously said to Mag, "Thank you for your hospitality." 2. TT's 2. Crassus and Julian also put down the spoons in their hands. The originally harmonious scene became tense all of a sudden. "I have something to say." Meg coughed softly. He wanted to say something harmonious and friendly. After all, this was his restaurant. If they were to fight here, Amy's would have to prepare for the reconstruction. "Wow. Grandpa Baldy, your hair has grown out." Right at this moment, Amy looked up at Rex and blinked. Then, she pointed at his head in disbelief. Everyone was stunned. Then, their gazes landed on Rex's head uncontrollably. There were really strands of fine hair growing out of that head that was as smooth as a braised egg. It was like the grass that emerged from the soil after the spring rain. It was so short that it could almost be ignored. It was as thin as a baby's hair, and was only a little black. However, this hair was really there. The hairless monk actually has hair. Everyone was stunned for a moment, including Michael and Roland. The hairless monk got his name because he had no hair on his bald head. Ever since he appeared, he had always been hairless. Even after staying in the Bastille prison for 100 years, he was still bald when he came out. But now, he actually had hair. Shocking. The hairless monk actually grew a head of thick hair after eating in a certain restaurant. This restaurant is probably going to become a great place for young men with hair loss to check in. Meg looked at everyone's expressions. He had already thought of tomorrow's newspaper headline for the newspaper. Could the function of the system's so-called high-level delicacy be to help the greasy middle-aged man get rid of his bald head? Although baldness was indeed quite troublesome, and was basically equivalent to an incurable disease, it was still a high-level recipe that he had painstakingly obtained. Wasn't this a little too hasty? Hair. Lex was stunned after hearing that. He reached out and touched the top of his head gently. The soft touch made him retract his hand as if he had been electrocuted. After a while, he reached out and touched the top of his head again. Although it was only a short layer, it was completely different from the bald feeling in the past. This was the first time he felt hair on the top of his head since he was born. His hand was trembling slightly, and he couldn't help but feel agitated. After he was lucky enough to survive, the biggest difference between him and a normal person was that he didn't have hair. Because of that, he was ridiculed and humiliated. And now, he was going to have hair. If he had hair, then he wouldn't look any different from a normal person, right? After tasting the delicious Buddha jumps over the wall, Lex felt some changes in his state of mind. A small tree seemed to have been planted in his originally empty heart, and now, there seemed to be sunshine again. A rebirth was waiting for him there. Lex looked at Michael, and said calmly, "I won't go back to the prison." Michael stood up with his sword, and said calmly, "We will bring you back." Roland also held his magic wand. Lex placed his hand on the table, glanced at Roland, and said, "If you must bring me back, I will destroy the entire Bastille prison. If you release me, I can join Chaos City, and I promise to abide by Chaos City's laws and protect it." Roland and Michael seemed to be in deep thought. Given Lex's power, destroying the Bastille prison wasn't an insignificant threat. Furthermore, if he were to join Chaos City and become its guardian, it would be even more tempting when the situation of the various races was still unclear. The hairless monk is already dead. He died 100 years ago. Lex stood up and looked at Amy. His stiff face moved, and he revealed a smile. "Now, I am Lex. Lex with hair." With hair, he was that confident. Chapter 11:13. The restaurant was silent for a long time. Only the soft sound of Amy drinking her soup could be heard. Everyone was looking at Michael and Roland. Their decision today might have a long-term impact on Chaos City. A hairless monk who had hair decided to bid farewell to his past and start a new life in Chaos City. Whether to accept him or to stand against him, this question would be decided by the two people in power in Chaos City. If I didn't remember wrongly, what was the name of that bald demon back then? He wasn't a good person either, right? Many human ladies were destroyed in their hands, Crassus said with pursed lips as he stroked his beard. Julian also said in a hoarse voice, "I went to that town called Carteru back then. There were traces of magic wreaking havoc there. The hairless monk doesn't know magic, so I'm afraid it wasn't as simple as a massacre. Exterminating an entire tribe and massacring a city. He is indeed a ferocious person." Meg looked at Rex in surprise. This jailbreaker who successfully alarmed Michael and Roland to take action at the same time had indeed committed a shocking crime 100 years ago. However, judging from Julian and Crassus' behavior, although they saw him as a dangerous target, they weren't too disgusted by what he had done. Instead, they felt a sense of camaraderie between heroes. After all, the two of them had joined forces to exterminate a tribe of ogres back then. Rex looked at the two of them calmly as he waited for their reply. Michael pondered for a while before looking at Roland. Roland nodded slightly before looking at Rex, and said, "I've read through the files regarding your case before. There are indeed some suspicious points. However, you didn't say anything for so many years, so we couldn't investigate. Now, can you tell us what happened in Carteru back then? Did you massacre everyone in the town?" Grandpa bawled, "You have to be honest with Uncle City Lord. He is a good person, and he will definitely help you," Amy said with a serious expression as she looked up. Rex looked up at the ceiling, and his deep gaze gradually deepened. His thoughts seemed to have returned to that small town by the border 100 years ago. "I went to Carteru right after I massacred the Slyles. That day, the sandstorm was very strong. The yellow sand covered the sky and almost completely covered Carteru. Before we even reached Carteru, I could already feel a strong magical aura. Carteru is just an ordinary border town, and there aren't any powerful magicians. Many years ago, I already had the ability to kill the people who persecuted my mother, but I didn't do it. I waited until I was able to kill the great elder of the Sly clan before I started to act. I started by exterminating the Sly demons. However, when I entered Carteru, I discovered that the entire town had been massacred. Everyone was dead, regardless of whether they were adults or children. Even the dogs in the town were all dead. I walked through the streets filled with corpses and found the people who killed my mother in a broken house. They were also dead. My enemies are all dead. I stood in Carteru's square for a day and then left. You should know what happened after that." Lex retracted her gaze. There was still a tinge of sadness in her eyes, but her expression was calm. "In other words, the massacre in Carteru town had nothing to do with you. Then why didn't you mention it to anyone? Even when you were caught, you didn't mention it." Michael looked at Lex in confusion. The incident happened during the racial war. After Carteru town was massacred, it was quickly buried by yellow sand. No one knew what exactly happened back then, but there were witnesses who said with certainty that they saw Lex leaving Carteru town on the day of the incident. Before that, he had just massacred the Sly clan, so this incident was quickly determined to be a revenge massacre. Lex seemed to have acquiesced to this incident, and didn't give any response. Therefore, after the racial war ended, the various races carried out a purge on the numerous notorious villains. The hairless monk, who had slaughtered an entire demon race and massacred a small human town, became one of the villains. He was besieged by the human race and demon race experts, and was finally locked up in the Bastille prison. "Since my enemies are dead, it doesn't matter to me who killed them. I don't want to explain anything to anyone, either," Lex said matter-of-factly. During the trial back then, he didn't say a word. In the end, he was convicted as a tacit admission of guilt. Roland nodded at Michael. Mag, who had remained silent this entire time, suddenly interjected, "In that case, his crime should be the massacre of the Shulai tribe. Considering the crimes that the Shulai tribe committed against the human race, from the perspective of the humans, he should be considered a hero, right? If the Sly clan wasn't massacred by him, we would have massacred them too, right?" Crassus said casually. "Millimeter. Julian agreed with Crassus' words, which was a rare occurrence. If that's the case, then Grandpa Baldy was wrongly accused. How pitiful. He lived in a dark place for 100 years, and he didn't even get to eat good food," Amy said as she looked at Lex sympathetically. Everyone was also looking at Lex sympathetically. He had been wrongly accused for 100 years. How pitiful. The original sentence was 200 years of imprisonment. Half of the sentence has already passed. If you really weren't responsible for the massacre of Carteru town, then you only have to take responsibility for the massacre of the Sly clan, and bear half of the sentence. Roland looked at Lex, and extended his right hand. "Congratulations, your imprisonment is over. From now on, you are free again." Lex looked at Roland, and hesitated for a moment before reaching out to shake his hand. "Welcome to Chaos City, and become the guardian of Chaos City." Michael also extended his hand to Lex with a smile. Lex looked at Michael, and was a little dazed. After a while, he came back to his senses, and shook his hand as he excitedly said, "Thank you. The atmosphere in the restaurant became more relaxed all of a sudden. The matter had been resolved perfectly, and there was no need to fight. Everyone heaved a sigh of relief. Amy smiled and said, "That's great. Let's continue eating." "Yes, let's continue eating. The restaurant is about to open for business." Meg glanced at the time and urged them with a smile. Although it seemed like something terrible had just happened, to him, opening for business on time was obviously the most important thing. Everyone sat down again and began to eat. When everyone was almost done eating, Michael took out his money bag and said to Meg, "Mr. Mac, sorry for the trouble. Take a look at how much Roland, Lex, and I have spent. I will give it to you. Don't mention it, City Lord. As a resident of Chaos City, this is what I should do. Forget about the other dishes. 3 bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall cost 30,000 copper coins," Meg said with a smile. Chapter 11:14. Michael, who was taking out his wallet, was stunned. He asked with uncertainty, "How much?" 30,000 copper coins. A bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall costs 10,000 copper coins. Meg smiled as he flipped open the menu. Under the soup column, it was written, "Buddha jumps over the wall, 10,000 copper coins for a bowl, 10,000 copper coins for a bowl." Everyone in the restaurant looked at Meg in disbelief. Although the prices of Mammoth's dishes were not low, wasn't it a little too exaggerated to charge 10,000 copper coins for a bowl of soup? Wait a minute. I just drank a bowl of soup that costs 10,000 copper coins. Oh my God. Wouldn't that be more than 100 copper coins? No wonder it smells so good. Every mouthful is filled with the taste of money. Yarbemia licked her lips as she seriously recalled the taste of money. Such delicacies can no longer be measured by money, Rex praised sincerely before saying to Michael, "I'm sorry to have made the City Lord spend so much money." The corner of Michael's mouth twitched. People without money were so free and easy with their words. Apart from being delicious, Buddha jumps over the wall also has a very good nourishing effect. The ingredients used are all the best, and the price is fair. Meg was still smiling. The price was indeed fair. After drinking a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall, he felt a surge of energy in his body. His body that was already at the peak of 8th tier actually had a faint feeling of breaking through. This meant that Buddha jumps over the wall had a very good effect on the knight's training other than promoting hair growth and atavism. "Here are 30 dragon coins." Michael took out 30 dragon coins from his wallet and passed them to Meg. Although he was not short of money as the City Lord, it was still a little painful to spend 30,000 dragon coins for a meal. After all, Chaos City's funds were a little tight recently. "Roland, I think we should reconsider the tax exemption policy for the food and beverage industry," Michael asked Roland as they walked out of Mammoth. Roland glanced at Rex with a smile and said, "If 30,000 copper coins can be exchanged for a 10th-tier powerhouse in Chaos City, I suggest we subsidize this restaurant and waive the management fee." Wesley and the group from Grey Temple were waiting outside the restaurant nervously. They were stunned when they saw the City Lord and the Temple Master walking out of the door while chatting happily with the hairless monk following behind them. The atmosphere was harmonious. Wesley twirled a green chain in his hand. He glanced at Lex and said, "City Lord." Michael raised his hand and gestured for Wesley to put down the chain. He smiled and said, "Oh, Wesley, bring Lex to go through the procedures to be released from prison in a while. Then, send someone to assist him to the City Lord's office to apply for a resident card. From today onwards, his sentence is over, and he is willing to join Chaos City. I have already agreed to let him join. His sentence is over, and he is going to join Chaos City." Wesley looked at Michael in confusion, and then at Lex, who was standing at the side with his hands tied. This hairless monk, who had escaped from Bastille prison and was listed as a superfelon, was actually announced to be released on the spot after his sentence was over, and he was even allowed to join Chaos City. Wesley felt that his brain couldn't wrap itself around it all of a sudden. "I will tell you the details when we get back. Get them to remove the security and alarm first. Don't affect Mr. Mac's business." Michael didn't explain further. "All right. Wesley nodded upon hearing that. He turned around and told the prison guards to leave. This was obviously the city lord and the temple master's decision. With these two making the decision, there would definitely be no problem. On the other side, Roland also gestured for the Grey Temple to remove the security. Very soon, everyone left separately, and Mammoth's surroundings returned to normal. What's going on? Why are they leaving just like that? The fight hasn't started yet, right? That goes without saying. The city lord and the temple master are both here. What else can't they suppress? I say, don't tell me the city lord and the temple master went in for a meal. I feel that this time is just right for a meal. The onlookers were curious and a little disappointed. The big scene that everyone expected didn't happen. However, the customers in the queue were overjoyed. They were initially worried that they wouldn't be able to have a meal tonight, but the matter was resolved faster than expected. When the long queue was rearranged in front of Mammoth, it was just the usual opening hours. I heard that a prisoner escaped from prison. It should be that bald hunk who just entered the restaurant. Mr. Mack is really resourceful. How can such a big incident not affect the business? This is probably the charm of good food. There's nothing that good food can't solve. If there is, then it's because there aren't enough dishes. If that's the case, I'm rather curious about what they ate inside just now. Could it be the new Buddha jumps over the wall? The customers discussed softly among themselves. The restaurant's door opened, and Crassus and Julian walked out first. Then, Meg walked out, and said with a smile, there was a small incident just now. Luckily, it didn't affect everyone's meal time. Welcome to Mammoth. Welcome, Amy said as she clapped her hands and stood beside Meg with Ugly Duckling in her arms. The customers smiled knowingly. Little Boss was still so cute. They started to enter the restaurant one after another. When Harrison walked to the door, he couldn't help but ask curiously, Mr. Mack, what happened inside just now? Everyone turned to look at him, their curiosity bursting. Do you want to know? The kind that goes into the courtyard next door, Meg said with a smile. Well, I'm here to try the new dish. Harrison's expression became serious as he walked into the restaurant with his head held high. Everyone also retracted their gazes. The courtyard next door wasn't a good place. No one wanted to go in just because of curiosity. Oh my God. Am I seeing things? This dish costs 10,000 copper coins. Everyone had just taken their seats when a beautiful elf covered her mouth and exclaimed softly, Buddha jumps over the wall, 10,000 copper coins for a bowl. The customers all flipped open the menu. When they saw the soup column, they were all shocked. This bowl is equivalent to 2 months of my salary, a girl mumbled as she swallowed her saliva. One of the ladies mumbled and swallowed her saliva. She could still bring a few of her friends over to try the spicy grilled fish, but this bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup was clearly not meant to be shared. The high price still shocked the customers. Although there was no lack of petit bourgeois and nouveau riche among the customers, not everyone was willing to spend 10,000 copper coins on a bowl of soup that no one had tried before. This price was a little too ridiculously high. Buddha jumps over the wall is super delicious. That bald grandpa just now jumped over from next door because he smelled the aroma. After drinking it, even his hair grew out. Amy recommended seriously. Give me a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall. A hurried voice came from the corner. Chapter 11:15. Everyone's gaze followed the voice and landed on the young man in the corner. It was a tall young man who looked to be about 20 years old. He had a high-nose bridge, a handsome face, and thick golden hair. He was wearing soft armor that was mixed with gold and silver. There was a long sword beside his hand, and the hilt of the sword was inlaid with a sapphire. He seemed to be a young knight. So handsome. The eyes of the little girl beside him were already filled with stars. A rich, handsome, and powerful man was simply irresistible. Everyone looked curiously at the young man who was the first to decide to try Buddha jumps over the wall. Perhaps he could verify whether this soup was worth the price. Okay, please wait a moment. Meg nodded slightly. He was also a little surprised that the first serving of Buddha jumps over the wall would be ordered so quickly. However, this young man's hair was also quite thick. Why was he so excited when he heard that it could grow hair? Adams retracted his hand and tried to make his expression look indifferent. However, his hand that was tapping on his thigh showed that he was not calm in his heart. He was indeed not calm. When he heard that the bald man had grown hair after eating Buddha jumps over the wall, his heart was in turmoil. Some people looked like ghosts on the surface, but in fact, they did not have a single strand of hair. Unfortunately, Adams was such a person. His family's hereditary baldness had caused him to start losing hair at the age of 14. On his 18th birthday, the last tuft of hair that had been coiled 3 times on his head had finally left him. That day had become his darkest day. At such a young age, he was already under pressure that he should not have been under at his age. Adams was born into a wealthy merchant family. As a second-generation rich man, he was also a gifted knight who had successfully become a third-level knight before he was 18 years old. However, ever since he lost the last tuft of hair, his strength had stagnated, and there was no progress in the past 2 years. He could feel that he was just a little bit away from a breakthrough. However, that thin layer of paper stopped him outside the wall, and he was unable to take even half a step forward. The genius who was once given high hopes had become a joke to others. If he still had hair, he felt that the pressure he had endured in the past 2 years was enough to make him lose another head. Baldness was not an illness, so even the best doctors and magicians could not make his hair grow back. Although this golden wig could make him look bright and beautiful on the surface, it could not make up for the inferiority in his heart and the envy he had for those with lush hair. Moreover, he had a vague premonition that if his hair couldn't grow back, his strength might not improve at all. The 3-year agreement between him and his father was coming to an end tomorrow. If he couldn't break through by then, he would have to go home and inherit his family fortune. Just thinking about it made him shudder. Who could imagine this kind of pain? Lying in the halo of his father, living lazily like a maggot, he couldn't imagine such a life. So when he heard Amy's words, he was so excited that he almost jumped up. There was actually something in this world that could regenerate hair. He could be considered a regular at Immerse. Half a month ago, he was brought here by a friend to try the grilled fish and beer. Since then, he had developed the habit of settling his 3 meals at Immerse. He believed the cute little boss's words very much. If it was really effective, let alone 10,000 copper coins, even if it was 100,000 copper coins or 1 million copper coins, he wouldn't even bat an eyelid. 10,000 copper coins for a bowl. It's equivalent to a restaurant's daily profit. Should I try it? Harrison, who was sitting opposite Adams, was in a dilemma. The other customers were waiting curiously for the Buddha jumps over the wall that Adams ordered. Although most of them felt that they wouldn't spend 10,000 copper coins for a bowl of soup, they were still very curious. Meg lifted the lotus leaf, scooped a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall into a ceramic bowl, and handed it to Yarbemia. Yarbemia carefully carried the tray out of the kitchen. Every step she took was extra careful. It was 10,000 copper coins, after all. She could count every single one of them with her bare hands. The rich aroma of meat wafted into the restaurant. Everyone's eyes lit up. This aroma was exactly the same as the one they smelled before. It was just that it was closer now, and it smelled even more rich. There was the fresh aroma of seafood, as well as the rich aroma of meat. All kinds of aromas were mixed together, but each had its own flavor. It was extremely tempting. Everyone's gaze couldn't help but follow the Buddha jumps over the wall. Your Buddha jumps over the wall. Yarbemia gently placed the black ceramic bowl in front of Adams, and said with a smile. Although she wasn't worried that the delicacies made by her boss wouldn't sell well, she still had a good impression of this customer who was the first to try it. Usually, the opening of a popular dish would start from the first person who tried it. "Thank you," Adams said. His gaze was completely attracted by the Buddha jumps over the wall in front of him. The aroma wafted over along with the heat, went into his nose, and also into his heart. Other than the aroma of various ingredients, there seemed to be a wine aroma as well. It was different from beer and red wine, but that unique wine aroma made people feel intoxicated. There were also many ingredients in the soup. Some were floating, and some were hidden in the thick soup. Every one of them was different. It smells so good. It's 100 times more delicious than I imagined. I hope it can really make my hair grow back. Adam's eyes were filled with surprise. He immediately picked up the spoon and scooped a spoonful of soup into his mouth. This taste. Adam's eyes lit up immediately. The rich soup slid into his mouth, and it seemed as if there were dozens of flavors exploding in his mouth at the same time. The taste buds on the tip of his tongue quickly fell into a carnival. He didn't think that he was a person who was sensitive to taste. However, in this mouthful of thick soup, he could taste the flavors of dozens of ingredients. Chicken, abalone, pork tripe. It brought about a rich sense of layering that made people indulge in it. Gulp. After swallowing a mouthful of soup, a slightly numb feeling spread to his limbs and bones. Then, it started to rise from the soles of his feet to the top of his head. He could clearly feel that there were countless ants crawling on his scalp under the wig. It was as if something was going to drill out from his scalp. The numb feeling made him want to tear off the wig and scratch it. What a strong feeling. Could it be that my hair is really going to grow back? Adams was ecstatic. He picked up the spoon and scooped another spoonful of soup into his mouth. The numb feeling on his scalp became clearer and clearer. This feeling wasn't uncomfortable. After getting used to it, it felt as if there was a pair of gentle hands pressing on the top of his head. Moreover, every press was accurately pressed on the most comfortable acupuncture points. It was so comfortable that he almost wanted to cry out. At this moment, Adams suddenly heard a soft sound in his body. Chapter 11:16. This is. Adams was stunned for a moment. He subconsciously checked the situation in his body, and then his eyes gradually widened. He suddenly stood up and exclaimed with a face full of ecstasy, I broke through. His strength that had not improved in the slightest for 4 years had actually just broken through the barrier. He, who had been at the peak of 3rd level for a long time, finally took that step and became a true 4th level knight. His body seemed to be undergoing a reorganization, and his bones made a slight crisp sound. He clenched his fist hard, and a strong feeling of strength came back clearly. It was a feeling of strength that he had never experienced before. Although there was only a difference of 1 level between 3rd level and 4th level, it was the difference between a low-level knight and a high-level knight. Adam's body was trembling slightly. Excitement could no longer describe his feelings at this moment. No one knew how he had spent the past 2 years. Every sleepless night, he would lie in the room that was as splendid as a palace, holding his head that was as big as a stewed egg, and crying bitterly in front of the mirror that was studded with jewels. Not only did he have to guard against the night attacks of those beautiful and plump ladies, he also had to bear the pressure of the 3-year promise. These days were simply unbearable. And now, he had finally broken through. 4th level. He had finally passed the 4th level. He could finally stand in front of his father openly, refuse to inherit those dirty money, and continue to pursue his dream of becoming a great knight. His goal was Alex, that legendary knight. Only by abandoning all distracting thoughts and temptations, and focusing on the great cause of being a knight, could he become a great person like him, right? Yes, it must be like this. Adams thought with certainty in his heart. He had already made up his mind that before he became a great knight, he would definitely not be affected by other things. Mama, what's wrong with that brother? A little girl looked at Adams with some fear. The young woman sitting next to the little girl thought for a while and said, maybe the food that Mr. Mac made was so delicious that he went crazy. Oh. The little girl nodded thoughtfully, and then said with a serious face, then let's not eat that thing. Let's just eat 2 more ice creams. Eating ice creams won't make him go crazy. The other guests also looked at Adams in surprise. This young man looked quite normal, but after drinking a few mouthfuls of soup, how did he get drunk? Adams quickly realized that his reaction seemed to be a little overboard. He blushed and awkwardly retracted his finger that was pointing at the ceiling. He nodded apologetically at everyone before sitting back down and picking up his spoon to continue eating the Buddha jumps over the wall. At this moment, in his heart, this was not just a delicious soup, but a divine medicine that gave him a new life. Before the 3-year promise was up, he had successfully broken through to level 4. Furthermore, he felt that something was emerging from the top of his head. He was 100% sure that it was hair that had been extinct for several years, and it was growing recklessly. A bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup had completely changed his fate. He no longer needed to lower his head to fate. What young mistress of equal social status? What money that he could spend in a few lifetimes? These things were not worthy of stopping him from pursuing his dream. Bro, is it really that good? Harrison asked hesitantly as he looked at Adams, who was in tears. Adams raised his head and vaguely said, "This can no longer be described as good. This is my faith for life. If that's the case, then it's really worth giving it a try." Harrison nodded and finally made up his mind. He raised his hand and said, "Give me a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup too." I'll have one, too." "Then, give us 2 more small bowls." The effect of Adams' tasting was remarkable. It successfully made many customers who were originally hesitating start to order. Adams, who was eating halfway, quickly raised his hand, wanting to order another bowl. He had only eaten half a bowl, and the effect was already so strong. If he could take off his wig and stand in front of his father tomorrow, he would definitely give him an even greater shock. "I'm sorry, sir. Because the quantity of Buddha jumps over the wall soup is limited, each person can only order 1 bowl." Mia looked at him and shook her head slightly. "I can only order 1 bowl?" Adams was a little disappointed. After thinking for a while, he tried again, and said, "I'll double the price. Can you give me another bowl?" "I'm sorry, I can't." Mia shook her head. 20,000 copper coins for a bowl was really too tempting. However, the boss had already told her that there were only a dozen or so bowls of Buddha jumps over the wall soup left. In order to let more customers try it, it was necessary to limit the quantity of Buddha jumps over the wall soup. Adams was also a regular customer of Mammoth's. He knew the restaurant's rules and Mr. Mac's temper very well. Many beautiful ladies had tried their best to get an extra bowl of tofu pudding, but none of them had succeeded. "All right, thank you." Adams nodded his head slightly in a cultured manner. It seemed like he could only come again tomorrow. After finishing the Buddha jumps over the wall soup, Adams ate another bowl of Yangju fried rice. After paying for it, he stood up and left the restaurant. Right now, he just wanted to go home immediately, take off his wig, and see if there was really hair growing on his head. Adams' action of increasing the price by 10,000 copper coins for an extra bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup stimulated many customers who were hesitating. Soon, a few more customers ordered the Buddha jumps over the wall soup. "I'm sorry, sir. The Buddha jumps over the wall soup is sold out. Please order again next time." Mia looked at a bald-headed customer and smiled. "Didn't only a dozen people order it? Did you only prepare so little? Can you ask Mr. Mac to make another bowl for me?" That customer looked around and asked in confusion. Mia shook her head and said, "Because it was just released today, we didn't prepare a lot of it. Also, the process of making Buddha jumps over the wall soup is very complicated. It requires several days of meticulous cooking before it can be completed. In the future, we won't be able to release a lot of it every day, so the boss can't make another bowl for you immediately." "I see." That customer nodded his head thoughtfully. Although he was a little disappointed, he still ordered another dish. At the same time, he secretly made up his mind that he would not hesitate again tomorrow. "It's so magical. After eating this Buddha jumps over the wall soup, my strength actually increase. Master said that I wouldn't be able to break through and become a second-tier knight within 10 years. But now, I am already a second-tier knight." A young knight stood up in surprise after finishing a bowl of Buddha jumps over the wall soup. His face was filled with ecstasy. "Mommy, look. Another uncle has gone crazy." The little girl from before sighed. She looked at her mother and said, "Let's just eat ice cream." It's delicious and safe. That makes sense. The young woman nodded and raised her hand to order 2 more ice creams. Chapter 11:17. I didn't expect this Buddha jumps over the wall to have the effect of increasing a knight's strength. If that's the case, 10,000 copper coins is definitely worth it for a knight. The customers looked at the ecstatic young knight, and suddenly understood why the handsome knight who was the first to try the Buddha jumps over the wall was so excited. He must have also discovered the effect of the Buddha jumps over the wall. You. Take a look. Has my hair grown out? It's on the top of my head. A middle-aged man with a bald head tugged at his friend sitting beside him excitedly. It really grew out. His friend took a glance, and his eyes widened. He stood up from his chair immediately. This childhood friend of his had been losing hair since he was young. He lost all his hair not long after he became an adult. Now, there was only a circle of hair around his head, and the center of his head was as bald as a braised egg. However, the top of his head that had been bald for more than 10 years was now covered with fine hair. Although it looked as translucent as a baby's hair, it was real. Oh my God! That middle-aged man covered his face with a dumbfounded expression. After a while, he reached out to touch his head carefully. It was different from the usual bald feeling. Now, there was a furry feeling. How many years had it been? The barren land actually sprouted again. Mr. Mac, I really don't know how to thank you. You are my second parent. The middle-aged man stood up and bowed in the direction of the kitchen. He was so excited that he couldn't control himself. Fuck. It actually has the effect of growing hair. The bald burly man who didn't order the Buddha jumps over the wall suddenly stood up and looked at the excited middle-aged man with envy. The customers who were suffering from hair loss also had their eyes lit up. Although 10,000 copper coins wasn't a small amount, if it could solve the problem of hair loss and let hair regrow, they wouldn't feel the pinch even if they had to order a few more bowls. Mond, who was sitting outside the restaurant, touched his bald head and whispered to Sajaras, "Boss, should we try a bowl?" Keel and the rest looked at each other's bald heads with an inexplicable look in their eyes. Ever since they could remember, they had forgotten how it felt to have hair. Now that they heard it, they were really tempted. Hair. It's just a useless worry. Sajaras smiled disdainfully as he touched his big bald head, and proudly said, "This is the mark of us lava demons. It's a mark that no one can imitate or surpass." All the demons looked at Sajaras, and their pride surged. They even found each other's bald heads much more pleasing to the eye. "Boss, is it because we can't afford it?" Mond whispered. "Can't afford it?" Hair. Sajaras smirked disdainfully, and slapped a shriveled purse on the table. With a complicated expression, he said, "We really can't afford it. But do you think it's worth it to pay 50 holy Rugiamos for a little hair?" Sajaras glanced at the crowd. Not worth it. All the evil demons shook their heads with firm gazes. Compared to the holy Rugiamo, his hair was not even worth mentioning. "What is our goal?" "Let all the demons in the tribe eat Rugiamo," the demons said in unison. Sajaras took a bite of the Rugiamo in his hand, and worriedly said, "The road ahead is long, the road ahead is long." All the demons lowered their heads in shame, and continued to eat their Rugiamos. They didn't mention the Buddha jumps over the wall again. "My hair has really grown out." Standing in front of the mirror inlaid with gems, Adams looked at himself in the mirror. Fine hair had grown out of his bald head. His light golden hair was almost transparent, soft, and short. However, in Adam's eyes, it was as if it was emitting a golden light. It was exceptionally bright and dazzling. "It's all grown out. When it grows out, I'll have real hair. This is great." Adams stood in front of the mirror and looked at himself for a long time. He couldn't stop smiling at the mirror. If it wasn't for his rationality, he couldn't wait to announce to the world that he, Adams, finally had hair of his own again. "Now that I have hair again, and my ability has successfully broken through to the 4th tier, I'll definitely give Father a big surprise tomorrow, right?" Adams smiled brightly. The Gould Manor was still brightly lit. The servants were walking back and forth, preparing for the banquet tomorrow. A bald man in a lavish black robe stood on the stage, and loudly said, "Check the banquet's layout again. I've invited most of the big shots in Chaos City tomorrow to witness the outcome of this 3-year agreement between us father and son. Of course, this is also the time for me to formally introduce my successor. It must be grand enough." Chani, the head of the Gould family, was one of the top 10 richest people in Chaos City. Adams was his only son, and he had been working hard to nurture him to be the successor of the Gould family and an outstanding businessman. However, Adams had no interest in doing business since he was young. Instead, he was very interested in the knight's martial arts that he had learned to strengthen his body. In the end, the relationship between father and son was strained. In order to let Adams return to the family business voluntarily, Chani made a 3-year agreement with him 3 years ago. If Adams couldn't become a 4th-tier knight in 3 years, he had to come back to inherit the family business. If he successfully broke through to the 4th tier, Chani wouldn't care about Adams becoming a knight anymore. At first, he was still worried that with Adams' talent, he wouldn't be able to break through in these 3 years. However, the good news was that 3 years had passed, and his ability had not improved at all. He was still a 3rd-tier knight. The Gould family has been doing business for generations. How could they have any talent in martial arts? This kid still wants to become a mid-tier knight. He must be dreaming. He'll have to learn from me obediently in the future, and inherit the Gould family's property properly. Chani smiled proudly as if he could already see the lively banquet tomorrow. He was finally going to get what he wanted, and retirement was not far away. "Warden, the damaged equipment has been repaired successfully. We have doubled the number of wardens patrolling as per your instructions," the deputy warden reported to Wesley. He glanced at Rex, who was standing not far away, and couldn't help but ask softly, "Warden, is he really the deputy warden now? This is the appointment order signed by the city lord. If you have any objections, you can raise them at the city lord's castle." Wesley took out a appointment order and opened it in front of the deputy warden. After that, he glanced at Rex with a complicated expression, and said, "Also, don't you feel especially safe with him around?" Chapter 11:18. Thank you for coming. Meg smiled as he sent off the last customer. He flipped over the plaque on the door and entered the restaurant. "All right, the rest of the time belongs to us. Are we going to have supper?" Amy's eyes lit up as she asked expectantly. Everyone's gaze also turned to Meg. Clap, clap. Meg clapped his hands, and the lights in the restaurant suddenly dimmed. Almost at the same time, several candles were lit, and Barbara slowly pushed a small cart out. On the cart was a large ice cream cake with 18 candles on it. In the center of the cake was a little person in a maid's outfit. It was none other than Yarbemia. "Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you." Everyone began to hum the birthday song as they looked at Yarbemia with smiles on their faces. This is. Yarbemia's mouth gaped open in surprise as she looked at the cake and everyone else. Soon, tears began to well up in her eyes. "Happy birthday, Mia," Meg said with a smile as he walked forward and placed a silver crown on her head. "Happy birthday, big sister Mia." Amy jumped forward and called out with a smile. "Happy birthday, Mia." Everyone also offered their birthday wishes and small gifts. Elizabeth smiled as she looked at the teary-eyed Mia. Although this little girl had suffered a lot, she had now met a group of companions who treated her very well. "Thank you. Thank you." Mia hugged the gifts and nodded in response. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she had to tilt her head up to prevent them from flowing out. In her past life, aside from her mother, no one had ever cared about her birthday, and no one had ever celebrated her birthday or prepared a birthday present for her. But today, this exquisite birthday cake, as well as the various birthday presents in her hands, made her feel a little overwhelmed. "According to our customs, you have to eat cake on your birthday. Before you blow out the candles, you can make a wish. Perhaps it will come true," Meg said as he looked at Mia. "Yes." Mia nodded and stood in front of the cake that was filled with candles. She put her palms together and closed her eyes. She began to make a wish sincerely. After a while, She opened her eyes and blew out 18 candles in one breath. The lights came on again, and everyone smiled. Meg had told them yesterday that he was going to celebrate Mia's birthday. Only MIA didn't know about it. Okay, let's cut the cake. Meg handed the knife that had been soaked in hot water to MIA. MIA placed the gift in her hand to the side and cut the ice cream cake into triangular pieces. She placed them on exquisite small plates and distributed them to everyone. "This cake is delicious," Amy said in surprise after taking a bite of the cake. "Yeah, today's cake is even more delicious than usual. Is it because it's Mia's birthday cake?" Barbara nodded. She then smeared some cream on the cake and tapped it on Mia's nose. Everyone ate the delicious cake, and in the second half of the meal, it became a cake battle. The ice cream cake was smeared on one's face, and the cool sensation was quite interesting. Joyful laughter reverberated in the restaurant, and the girls even danced the dance that they had just learned. Meg stood off to the side with a glass of beer in his hand. This birthday party in this alternate world was quite successful. After the revelry, everyone cleaned up the restaurant and left. "Thank you, boss," Mia said with a sob as she looked at Mag and went up to hug him tightly. "It's what I should do." Meg smiled and gently rubbed her head that was resting on his chest. He had picked her up at the door, and she was very adorable from the moment they met. Big sister MIA hugged father, and father gently rubbed her head. Is this overstepping his boundaries? Should I write it down? Amy fell into deep thought as she looked at the two of them hugging each other. MIA raised her head from Meg's arms and suddenly realized that she had taken the initiative to hug her boss. She blushed and took 2 steps back. Then, she said with a serious expression, "From tomorrow onwards, I'll work even harder." "You've already worked hard enough. Go back and have a good sleep." Meg shook his head with a smile. Mia's work attitude could only be described as a model worker. If she continued to work hard, he would feel quite embarrassed. Everyone bade farewell to each other. "MIA, I want to take you to a place." On the way back, Elizabeth stopped and turned to look at Yarbemia, whose cheeks were still red. "Big sister, I also have something to say to you." MIA stopped in her tracks and looked at Elizabeth. She whispered, "If I like boss, can we be together?" "You like him?" Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia with a complicated expression. She was a little annoyed, but at the same time, she had expected this. "I don't know." Yarbemia shook her head. She looked a little lost. "But, no one has ever treated me as well as he did. That day, when I escaped from the kitchen of that little restaurant, I thought I was dead. He brought me delicious food and let me stay as a member of the restaurant. He was the one who told me that I wasn't that bad. He was the one who taught me self-confidence and self-respect. He was also the one who gave me so many friendships and you. I don't know if I've really fallen in love with him, but I don't think any other man will be as important to me as he is to me." Yarbemia's gaze became firm. She looked at Elizabeth and smiled. "I think this is what it means to like someone." Elizabeth looked at Yarbemia for a long time. Her eyes were filled with heartache. She was about to say something, but she couldn't bring herself to say it. After a moment of silence, she nodded. "He is indeed a good person. But, I don't want to tell him." Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth and pleaded, "Can you keep this a secret for me?" "Why?" "If you like him, shouldn't you tell him directly?" Elizabeth was confused. "No." Yarbemia shook her head and sighed. "He's so outstanding. Only people like Miss Gloria and Miss Luna are compatible with him. I'm just a half-dragon who doesn't know anything. I don't deserve to be with him." Gloria looked at Yarbemia, who was grabbing her skirt and biting her lips. Gloria's heart skipped a beat. She grabbed Mia's hand and shook her head. "You're not a low-level half-dragon. You're the princess of the Frost Dragon tribe and will become a real golden dragon." Chapter 11:19. The Frost Dragon streaked across the sky, and flew out of Chaos City into the distance. Yarbemia sat on the dragon's back, and her panicked expression gradually calmed down. Then, She spread open her arms and welcomed the oncoming wind with an excited smile on her face. Even though this wasn't the first time she had flown into the sky on Elizabeth's back, it still felt very strange to be all alone. She enjoyed the feeling of the wind brushing past her and the pitch-black mountain range passing by quickly. She was like a free bird that could soar freely in this vast sky. Elizabeth landed on the summit of a tall mountain. The summit of the mountain was relatively flat, and there were rocks all over it. Occasionally, the cries of wild beasts could be heard from the forest below. "Big sister, why did you bring me here?" Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth, who had transformed back into her human form. She looked around curiously. This place should be very far away from Chaos City. "What I said to you just now was not to comfort you." A ring appeared in Elizabeth's hand. Light flashed, and a box that was emanating golden light fell into her hand. "What's this?" "This is the Golden Dragon Origin. Father prepared it for you on your coming-of-age ceremony," Elizabeth said. "Father prepared it for me?" Yarbemia was taken aback. She looked at the golden box in Elizabeth's hand with a panicked expression. "Yes. I've been looking for him for the past few years, but I couldn't find him. I only found this ring in Chaos City. He left a message in the ring telling me of your existence, and asked me to give you this Golden Dragon Origin on your coming-of-age ceremony so that you can break free from your half-dragon body and become a true giant golden dragon." Elizabeth nodded. But why didn't he come to see me himself? Since he appeared in Chaos City, why didn't he come to see me and Mother?" Mia's lips trembled slightly as she tried to hold back her tears. "I think he has his reasons. He has too many enemies in this world. Perhaps he just doesn't want others to know of your existence." Elizabeth went forward and hugged Mia gently. "Even though he has many flaws, I believe that he still loves us. But I really, really want to see him." Yarbemia couldn't hold it in anymore. She buried her head in Elizabeth's arms and began to cry. While Elizabeth gently patted her back, tears flashing in her eyes. How could she not feel the same way? After a long while, Yarbemia's emotions finally calmed down. "Fuse with this dragon origin. It's your coming-of-age ceremony today, and the effect is the best." While Elizabeth handed the glowing box to Mia. "Just bite your finger and drip your blood on the box." Mia held the golden box with both hands, and a warm feeling came from the box as if there was a life hidden inside. After a moment of hesitation, she bit her finger, and squeezed out a drop of golden blood, which she dripped onto the box. The faint golden light became extremely dazzling all of a sudden. Following a series of cracking sounds, the square box shattered like an eggshell, revealing a translucent golden ball within. It was soft to the touch, just like a peeled egg. Within that translucent eggshell, there was a little golden dragon swimming slowly. Roar. Right at this moment, a soft roar sounded from within the eggshell. That little golden dragon suddenly broke out of the eggshell. It flapped its wings, and crashed into Yarbemia's glabella. It transformed into a golden light, and disappeared into her glabella. Yarbemia's body suddenly froze like a wooden statue. Golden light flashed in her jewel-colored eyes, and it seemed that she was undergoing a miraculous transformation. It should be a success, right? Elizabeth stood at the side with a tinge of nervousness. The golden light flowed through Yarbemia's body, and her golden dragon tail sprang out almost instantly. Following that, golden scales appeared on her cheeks and wrists. These were the changes that happened after she ate the Buddha jumps over the wall. However, the transformation didn't stop there. The golden light became even more dazzling, and following a series of soft cracking sounds, Yarbemia's body began to expand. Her maid outfit was torn apart. Fine golden scales covered her body, and then they quickly grew in size. In the blink of an eye, a golden dragon with a wingspan of more than 50 meters appeared on the mountain peak. The golden scales on her slender body were emitting light, and they were dazzling under the moonlight. "It's a success," Elizabeth exclaimed in surprise. She glanced at the golden dragon's body, and her expression became even more surprised. She actually has the strength of a level 6 after just evolving. Roar. Yarbemia opened her eyes, and subconsciously opened her mouth to let out a cry. However, she realized that she had let out a majestic dragon's roar. What happened to me? She was stunned for a moment, and then she looked down. Elizabeth, who was standing in front of her, was now standing there like a small ant. Hey, sister, why did you become smaller? Mia was a little surprised. I didn't become smaller. You became bigger, Elizabeth said with a smile. I became bigger. Yarbemia was stunned for a moment, and when she looked down again, her eyes widened. Golden dragon scales, golden wings, golden claws. What a huge golden dragon. Where are my breasts? Yarbemia blurted out. However, she quickly came back to her senses. This wasn't the time to be calculative about this. How did she become such a huge golden dragon in the blink of an eye? This change was too much for her to handle. Don't worry. After fusing with the golden dragon source, you've gotten rid of your identity as a half-dragon and successfully evolved into a golden dragon. This is your dragon form, Elizabeth said with a smile. I've really become a golden dragon? Although Elizabeth had mentioned it before, when it really happened, Mia still felt that it was unreal. Her identity as a half-dragon had caused her to be humiliated since she was young. She had never thought that she would one day be able to get rid of this identity and become a noble dragon. Yes. From today onwards, you're a real golden dragon, Elizabeth said with certainty. Can I fly? After a moment of confusion, Yarbemia finally calmed down and asked Elizabeth with anticipation. As a dragon, flying is the most basic ability. I'm falling. Before Elizabeth could finish her sentence, Yarbemia, who had flapped her wings twice, fell from the top of the mountain. Impatient fellow, Elizabeth sighed and took a step forward. She transformed into a frost dragon and swooped down. Not long after, a golden dragon flapped her wings clumsily like a drowning person and flew up from the bottom of the mountain in a strange posture. A frost dragon slowly rose up to accompany her. Chapter 11:20. The golden dragon flew unsteadily in the sky. However, under the protection of the frost dragon, she gradually mastered the flying techniques and was able to fly normally. She then tried out some techniques such as turning and ascending. Whoa, this is so fun! The golden dragon flapped her wings and glided over the mountain peak. She bent over the mountain stream and flew close to the forest, leaving behind a string of bell-like laughter. She is indeed very talented. Elizabeth appeared at the top of the mountain and looked at Mia, who had mastered the flying technique, with a smile on her face. Yarbemia had her fun and landed on the mountain peak. She retracted her wings and transformed back into her human form. My clothes. When she landed, she realized that her clothes had been torn to shreds during her transformation. She hurriedly reached out to cover her breasts and lower body. Thank goodness my breasts are still here. She held her heavy breasts and heaved a sigh of relief. Sister, my clothes are gone. What should I do now? Yarbemia looked at Elizabeth for help. Dragons don't need to wear clothes. However, it is much more troublesome after you transform into a human. You can use your scales to transform into any kind of clothes, Elizabeth said as she demonstrated a small spell. Yarbemia blinked and imitated the spell. Golden light flashed, and a maid outfit identical to the one she was wearing appeared on her body. It really appeared. Yarbemia looked at the clothes on her body in surprise. She reached out to touch them. Other than the fact that the material was a little slippery, the style was no different from her previous clothes. However, these clothes were transformed from her scales. When she touched them, she felt as if her skin was being touched. This made her feel a little uncomfortable. It seems like I have to ask the boss to give me a new set of clothes. Otherwise, it will be very inconvenient for me to work, Mia thought to herself. Elizabeth said, clothes transformed from your scales will not be damaged during your transformation. If you want to wear normal clothes, it is best not to transform on the day. Okay. Yarbemia nodded. After hesitating for a while, she took 2 steps forward and said, Sister, there is something I have been wanting to ask you. I want to know, who hurt you before? Who inflicted such severe injuries on you? Yarbemia asked with a serious expression as she looked into Elizabeth's eyes. Elizabeth's eyes revealed a hint of surprise. After hesitating for a moment, she shook her head slightly and said, "You don't have to know about this." "No, I want to know." Yarbemia said firmly, "You are my only family. Although I am not as strong as you, I want to protect you. I want to stay by your side." Elizabeth felt as if her heart had skipped a beat. Looking at Mia's resolute gaze, her heart suddenly felt warm. No one had ever said such words to her. No one had ever said that they would stay by her side, and no one had ever promised to protect her. Even her mother had been telling her since she was young that she was the only one who could be responsible for her own life. No one would protect her, and no one would protect her. Elizabeth was silent for a moment before she said calmly, "Do you want to learn how to fight from me?" Yarbemia was stunned for a moment, but she quickly nodded and said, "Yes, I want to learn." "Okay, when you can really protect me, I will tell you the truth." Why Elizabeth nodded with a faint smile. She spread open her arms and transformed into a frost dragon again. She flew into the sky and looked down at Yarbemia. "From today onwards, I will cultivate with you for 3 hours every night before going back to sleep." "Okay." Yarbemia nodded. She transformed into a golden dragon and flew after the frost dragon. "You are late." Meg looked at Camilla, who was standing at the door with her arms crossed. She was wearing a black dress with a high slit, a black windbreaker, and a black gauze hat. He frowned slightly and said, "Also, where is your uniform? Although I agreed to your request and reluctantly joined your restaurant, when I come to work and what I wear, it is none of your business." Camilla glanced at Meg and smiled disdainfully. "Do you know our madam's noble status? How can a mere human like you order her around?" The black cat servant, who was wrapped in a black robe, stepped forward and yelled at the top of his voice. "In that case, it seems that I have to announce the photostone and let everyone know that our noble Madam Countess is a perverted masochist." Meg smiled. Camilla's expression froze. If the photostone was announced, wouldn't Miss Gloria know that she was a masochist? No. Such a thing must not happen. She had to leave a perfect image in Miss Gloria's mind. I didn't sleep well last night, so I woke up a little late. I will be on time tomorrow." Camilla coughed dryly. "Madam." The black cat servant's voice was filled with shock. "Where are your clothes?" Meg's gaze stopped at the deep cleavage in front of her chest for a while and asked, "I brought my clothes. I plan to change when I get to the restaurant." Camilla looked around. "After all, with my status, if people know that I am a waitress, it will be hard for me to go out and meet people. Being a waitress is a proper job." Meg rolled his eyes. However, seeing how careful Camilla was, he did not say anything more and let her enter the restaurant first. The black cat servant also wanted to enter the restaurant. The restaurant doesn't allow pets in. Employees are also not allowed to bring pets to work. Mag raised his hand to stop the black-robed servant. Even though the servant appeared to be a human being, he knew exactly what was hidden within the servant's robe. "I am Caesar, the most loyal servant of the Madam Countess. I must always serve the Madam. Wow. What a big black cat." Before Caesar could finish speaking, his black robe was suddenly torn off by Amy, who had appeared out of nowhere. Caesar, who was floating in midair, was stunned for a moment before he meowed and fell to the ground. He arched his back, and the black fur all over his body stood up like needles as he looked at Amy with a panicked expression. "Meow." Ugly Duckling jumped out from behind Amy and stood in front of Amy. Its claws were exposed from its little chubby paws as it looked at Caesar eagerly. Meow tilde. Caesar immediately tucked his tail between his legs and curled up on the ground, not daring to move. He peeked at Ugly Duckling from the corner of his eyes. "Useless." Camilla turned around to look at Caesar. She waved her hand, and said, "Go back." Meow tilde. As if he had been pardoned, Caesar did not even know how to speak human language. He turned around and disappeared with a whoosh. Chapter 11:21. The first room on the right is the bathroom. "You can change there," Meg said to Camilla. "Millimeter. Camilla responded and swayed her hips as she went upstairs. Soon, She changed into the chef's uniform that Meg had prepared for her and came downstairs. "Is big sister Camilla a chef too?" Amy asked curiously. "It's the same chef's uniform as mine," Anna said with a nod. "Yes, I'm best at blood salad and cold heart slices." Camilla licked her lips with her bright red tongue and revealed 2 sharp teeth in an attempt to scare the 2 lucky fellows. "Blood salad? Cold heart slices? Is it good?" Amy asked curiously. She did not look scared at all. "It's all right." Camilla nodded, a little disappointed. "Is it human blood?" Anna's voice trembled slightly. There was a hint of fear in her eyes. "Human blood won't do. Usually, human blood is very dirty and disgusting to drink." Camilla looked at Anna. She was very satisfied with this lucky fellow's performance. She bent down and continued with a smile, "It has to be a beautiful and kind lady. Their blood is sweet. Of course, a cute scorpion spirit like you is also very good." "Ah!" Anna screamed and hid behind Meg. She looked at Camilla with fear. "Anna, don't be afraid. She's just scaring you." Meg reached out and patted Anna's head to comfort her. Then, he looked at Camilla and said, "Your main job today is to learn how to prepare ingredients from Phyllis. Remember how to prepare each ingredient and how to use it." "Do I still need to learn such a simple job?" Camilla pursed her lips and walked toward the kitchen proudly. "Hello." Phyllis and Camilla greeted each other, but the wind blades didn't stop. The green wind blades were like sharp knives, easily slicing the ingredients into countless pieces and accurately placing them into different ingredient boxes. Camilla, who was standing at the kitchen door, looked at the ingredients and wind blades flying around with her mouth wide open. How the hell was he going to learn this? A smile appeared on Mag's face as he looked at Firis patiently teaching Camilla the cutting technique. At the same time, he felt even more of a pity that such a talented apprentice was going to leave. That would be a huge loss. As for Camilla, Meg didn't really want to do whatever he wanted with her film. After all, he was an honest person. Letting her work as a waiter in the restaurant was firstly to punish her for kidnapping him, and secondly to prevent her from continuing to cause trouble. He was in the light, while she was in the dark. Who knew if she would be ambushed again when she went out in the future? The best way to prevent it was to put her right in front of his eyes and use love and wisdom to influence her so that she would give up those stupid thoughts. Camilla, who was in the kitchen, glanced at Mag, and thought to herself, "It's so infuriating to see how smug this fellow is." "One day, I will tie you up again and let you have a taste of the whip and candles. Miss Anna, don't be afraid. Isn't it just 2 dishes? Let big sister Camilla cook for us next time." Amy also consoled her with a smile. I don't want to eat." Anna shook her head like a rattle drum. After hesitating for a while, she still went into the kitchen to help. "Father, Daphne said that they are going to have their holidays soon. Does that mean that I am going to have my holidays soon too? The kind where we can play for many, many days, and sleep in every day?" Amy looked up at Meg with anticipation written all over her little face. "It's winter holidays again?" Meg was a little surprised. Chaos School's holiday system was a little similar to China's. There was a 2-month holiday during the hottest part of summer, and a 1-month holiday during the coldest part of winter. Calculating the time, it was almost time for the holidays in half a month. However, although Amy was now considered half a student of Chaos School, she had always been learning magic from her 2 teachers, Crassus and Julian. He wasn't sure if they would follow Chaos School's holiday system. Meg smiled and said, "When I send you to school later, I will ask teacher Crassus when Amy can have her holidays." Millimeter HM. Amy nodded obediently. She shrunk her neck and mumbled, "It's so cold in winter. It would be great if I could sleep under my warm blanket every day." Meg shook his head with a smile. He couldn't blame Amy. In such a cold winter, no one would want to leave their warm blanket. Ding. The bell hanging on the door rang, and Yarbemia and Elizabeth pushed the door open and walked in. "Phew, the restaurant is still the warmest." Yarbemia heaved a sigh of relief. Then, she smiled energetically, and said, "Good morning, boss, Amy." "Good morning, big sister MIA, big sister Elizabeth." Amy also greeted the 2 of them. Good morning. Elizabeth nodded slightly. She still didn't smile. You guys are early today. Meg looked at the two of them in surprise. They were about 15 minutes earlier than usual. Yarbemia looked at Meg with a blush, and said, Boss, can you give me another maid uniform? My work uniform is bursting. Bursting? Meg was slightly stunned. His gaze subconsciously fell on Mia's chest. Compared to when she was first picked up by him, it had indeed become a lot bigger. However, it seemed a little exaggerated to say that her clothes were bursting. Meg's scorching gaze made Mia's face even redder. She quickly lowered her head and said, It's not bursting. It's because I transformed into a real giant dragon yesterday. That's why my clothes burst. Mia transformed into a real giant dragon? Meg was shocked. He carefully looked at Mia. Compared to yesterday, although her appearance didn't change much, she had the strength of a 6th tier. She went from a half-dragon with some brute strength to a 6th tier powerhouse overnight. The only explanation for all of this was that she had transformed into a dragon. Could it be because she ate the Buddha jumps over the wall? Yesterday, 2 knights successfully broke through after eating the Buddha jumps over the wall. Mia also showed some signs of atavism at that time. The Buddha jumps over the wall does have a promotion effect. Mia nodded. She subconsciously looked at Elizabeth. Meg saw that Mia didn't take the initiative to say anything, so he didn't ask further. He looked at her clothes and asked curiously, Then what's with the clothes you're wearing? Didn't you say that your clothes burst? As he said that, he reached out and touched her collar. It was smooth and comfortable. However, it wasn't very close to the skin. It was a little cold to the touch. It was a rather strange material. That's strange. What material is this? He touched her skirt again, but he still couldn't figure out what material it was. Translator, Atlas Studios editor, Atlas Studios. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.